All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today I am joined by award-winning filmmaker, author, somebody that actually has been in the chat multiple times. And I've already been talking about his books, Robert John Hammond. How are you doing today, sir?
Great, David. Thanks or I should say Patrick. I know you go by BPH.
I'm going to give away the secret here since we're live, but Patrick is like what my family and my friends and my Christian name. So most people who know me personally always call me Patrick. And then David is like professional relationships, right? That's when the registrar's office at the university, you're David.
Right. Well, I'm the same way then. John is my Christian name, and John the Theologian's my patron saint. And so I go by John with all my Christian friends, and Robert is my earth name.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, we have the same little structure then. So today I want to talk to you again. The plan was to do a review of this book, Voice in the Wilderness, which we're going to be talking about. There's a few sections that I think are incredibly important, and a topic, an easy digestible intro that for me connects so many dots of Orthodox history in the United States, how the important role Father Seraphim Rose has played, and how this has all sort of laid the landscape for the growth of Orthodox converts in America. And I want to get into your new documentary and all this different stuff. So we have a lot to discuss today, but I first want to thank you for all the work that you do. And I made a comment backstage. I was thinking before today, I was like, I got to ask this guy, how the heck does he make a documentary and publish 3 books within 6 months of 2025? So can you speak a little bit to how prolific your work ethic is?
Sure. Yeah. I think, a lot of people think, oh, did you just like came up with these and just start pumping these out like one after another? I go, not really, because a lot of things I've been working on for a long, long time, and I've been writing for a long, long time. So if you go to like on Amazon, you look up Robert John Hammond, Robert Hammond, and the books, and you click on it, you'll see books that go way back. I mean, like literally to the late 80s, which is probably before most of you are.
We just did that. I'll show them what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been writing books for a long time, and kind of jokingly, as I was saying back, I used to use like a chisel and like tablets. And then we graduated from there to like the actual quill and ink. And then went to, I mean, honestly, though, I used to write a lot with like longhand, like legal yellow tablets. I'd write like a whole book like that.
Wow.
Because I'm a pretty fast writer, I'm a fast reader. So, I mean, that's just part of my skill set gift that I have. But I do a lot of, research, and I used to do things on finance and all kinds of other topics, Hollywood. And so the way that I have done this is I've just gathered so much information, and I'm able to just kind of outline it really quick. And then I create like a template of this is what it's about. Let me focus on this. And then I just pour out. And I tell people this when I encourage people to write their stories, and I tell people, even if you read one of my books and you don't like it, you think, oh, it's not the way it should be. Then I go, well, I encourage you to write your own book. Write a book about Seraphim Rose. Write a book about American Orthodox, different saints, because I know I don't cover everything,
right?
And I know that I make a lot of mistakes, and I don't do it in an academic way, even though I have a Master of Fine Arts in creative writing. So I used to teach screenwriting. So that's my background is more Hollywood kind of screenwriting. So it's really general, it's made to be like fast paced.
Right.
And so that I write it like I'm just writing a script. And so I'm just seeing it like a movie. And so like you're just telling a story, you're just saying this happened, and these people what are you seeing? So when you read it, you'll notice that they're very like, along the winding path and the trees and then the candle, and
Yeah, right.
try to do it kind of in a poetic. And I used to write a lot of poetry, so I try to blend that. So that's kind of my long story short.
Yeah.
I just have been writing for a long, long time, and so it's like a lot of things. You get better at it, and then you use technology, to make it easier. Because I haven't, I mean, I do hand write a lot.
Yeah.
I literally still like to write by hand.
I'm the same. If I want to remember or memorize something, I always write it down with hand on paper. So most of my notes, because if I just type it up, it doesn't stick the same way.
Yeah, and there's a whole thing. I know I'm hearing that they're not even teaching cursive anymore.
It's true. Or reading analog clocks.
Yeah, exactly.
They're moving to digital because I was reading an article about
I've heard that.
Zers that they just can't read an analog clock.
Right. So that's one of the I can't say this jokingly, but I like to say I'm not young enough to know everything. So it's like, and I don't want to be like that. Back in my day, we used to do it, the hard way, but the reality is that there's something to be respected for, like our elders, excuse me, and just like the church fathers, and this wisdom that just passed down, from our parents,
right.
Our spiritual parents, or godfathers, etc. And realizing that it's not all about the modern technology. I mean, I do use it, obviously, I use a computer, and I can, Google search and find, I used to have to go to these things we call libraries, sit there with a stack of actual books and read them and take notes by hand. And I check books out, read them, buy books. I mean, I've got thousands of books. I probably have lost and given away and left behind more books than a lot of people have in their libraries, just because, I lived in a kind of a wild life too. So that's a whole other story.
Well, I mean, we don't have to get into the wild parts, but at least at some point, I would like, and maybe right now would be appropriate, just kind of introducing yourself to everybody. I think your background is going to resonate with a lot of people in this chat, because obviously there's a lot of Orthodox online content creators, but I guess my flavor, a lot of my audience have moved into Orthodoxy from the New Age, from occultism, from psychedelics, Eastern mysticism. And so I'm kind of that guy that is that bridge for a lot of those people. And that's kind of your spiritual background as well, that eventually brought you to Orthodoxy in California, through various life experiences. Do you mind getting into maybe your spiritual journey and how Orthodox, because this is going to play into, and I want to play the trailer for your documentary and all your books. So how did you get to the point where you're making all this stuff? What was your journey?
Well, yeah, and I use this phrase, long story short, a lot. Unfortunately, it's like War and Peace meets Crime and Punishment. I grew up in a small town called Santa Maria in California on the Central Coast, and our whole team was called the Saints. We were Protestants, and we went to a church called First Christian Church, which was a beautiful place. It was Protestant, called under the Disciples of Christ denomination. And we got baptized, sang in the choir, as a Boy Scout, and so that's kind of my background growing up. My dad's a doctor. My mother's got a master's of social work, and she taught. My dad was military also; he was an officer. So we lived a pretty, decent life, and went to, they took us to church. So that was my early background. So I grew up as a Christian, in a Christian home, but I became rebellious because I grew up, in the late '60s,
right?
And so I know it's way before your time, but you probably know a lot about it.
Right.
Where a lot of the Timothy Leary, a lot of the Beatles and all that. I remember when the Beatles came out on the Ed Sullivan Show, and everybody, kids were like, "Wow!" People were like, "When they consider that long hair. The hair was about as long as yours."
Right.
You see how long hair. And so I grew up in that background basically, and there was like the Summer of Love, literally late '60s, and I went up visited Haight Ashbury and places like that, even though we lived in a small town. So that was an influence. As I got into high school, that was kind of my friends started becoming, like quote hippies and just, love childs. And, it was all about peace and love, and it seemed like very positive. So I did a lot of the stuff that goes along with that, which a lot of it's just anti-establishment, down with the man, and, those squares and lames and all that. And so you're always like people are today, and everybody's like, oh, those stupid boomers, we were the same way then, but it was like, anyone over 30, don't trust them. So it's kind of a daddy issue thing that we all probably have to rebel against, whoever is above us, age
Right.
and demographics, et cetera, blame a group for all the problems in
Right.
the world. But anyway, I went through that rebellious, and I was anti-war, anti-establishment, and so that's kind of, I got into like a lot of new age, back to what you were referring to. And I studied, I did like yoga, and I was into martial arts, which Bruce Lee was a big thing,
Right.
and the show Kung
Absolutely.
Fu. And I was like totally, I'd come home and I'd be like doing moves, and I joined a, a dojo, and I was in tournaments, and, I used to fight, I wasn't that good, so I didn't do it very,
Right.
very long, but I did, I started like Tai Chi, and that was like the whole Taoist philosophy, yin and yang, and, and did meditation, yoga, and I was reading those kind of books when I was a kid too. So between reading a lot of new age, Eastern religion books, yoga and reincarnation and Zen Buddhism, and Alan Watts was very prominent then. He actually was on TV.
Right.
We used to actually watch him. My dad actually would put him on. And this is it. You talk about these Zen koans. The sound
Right.
of one hand slapping your grandfather's face in the forest with nobody around to hear it. It's like, so that was kind of the growth. That was my background, and so I went away from the church, pretty much. I was like, oh, I don't feel like going anymore. And then I got into a lot of other things over the years, and so finally, I got to a point where I got back to religion and Christianity, through some downfalls, as I won't go into all the details, but just some low points in
Right.
life. And I was like, oh no, but I can't take it. I'm gonna, die basically. I was at that brink,
Right.
low point. And then I really just searched, and then there was like a Bible near me, and I was like, oh, let me just read this. And I started reading it, and I was like, wait a minute. This, I've been knew about it, and I had read, Bible stories as a kid. And then it just hit me at one point that, wow, what if, Jesus Christ is actually who he is
Right.
presenting himself as? What if this resurrection is not just some spiritual, metaphor, which I started kind of telling myself that, oh, it's just all, mythology or something, or just,
Right.
I never stopped really believing he
Right. An
existed.
analogy for your own enlightenment or your own
Yeah.
christening.
Yeah, it's all about, you're reborn with a
Right.
new attitude,
Yeah. When you come down from the psilocybin and LSD.
Exactly. It's like, okay, that's, you're born again. So yeah, over and over, reincarnation too, right? So,
Right.
a lot of those things, they kind of blended together, because it's like, I didn't really take anything wholeheartedly, even though I kind of got into different groups at different times and say, okay, this is it, like all these different seminars, Est and some of that stuff. It was, LifeSpring, those kind of these spiritual, I don't know what you call them, large group awareness trainings, which that was a popular thing. You go to like a weekend, and everybody would
Like the Esalen Institute.
yeah, that type of
Yeah.
thing. Exactly that. And it's all, I know more what it is now,
Right.
where it comes from, but at the time it's like, oh, we didn't know, anything.
Right.
And there's, you can get some good things out of some of those things. So I don't want to just be like painting everything with a broad brush, that every, spiritual pursuit is just a total waste of time, or that everything's bad, or, even my growing up in the church, there was a lot of positive things. I thank God for my parents, my family, and the church that I grew up in, because it did teach me, the stories, and I did learn, something about, the ethics and morals, which I think is still important to have a framework of what's true, what's not true. But then again, you start doubting it. It's like, okay, well, no, that didn't really happen, right? Adam and Eve and all that, etc. And so that's kind of where I got to a point where I started bumping around into different churches when I did kind of get back into it. And I was like, oh, now, what should how, I didn't even realize that there were so many different denominations. I just grew up in one church, and that was kind of it. You just read the New Testament and be good. I'm like, oh, okay, that's easy enough, but didn't feel like okay, I know there's probably more to it than that, or it's just maybe it's not really. I'm just kind of going through the motions.
Right.
But then I tried to get like heavily into Christianity. And so that kind of led me into like, oh, well, you've got to really, if you really want to be a real Christian, you've got to, have the baptism of the Holy Spirit and the whole Pentecost. And so I tried that part of it, and I was like, yeah, that's a little bit too wild, I mean, kind of go through these emotions and try to fit in with it. But then it's like you got these TV evangelists, and I went
Right.
through that period where I would like watch these people on TV, and I was like, oh wow, that's I should send my money to them,
Yeah,
and
I'll become
get
wealthy.
yeah. I mean, I literally did fall for
Well,
a lot
Paula
of
White,
those.
she's in charge of the
I know.
Office
Don't
of
even get
Faith
me
at the White
started.
House. She did that from the White House, telling
I
people if
know.
they sent her $1,000 that God would bless them with prosperity.
Yeah, don't even get me
Unbelievable.
started on some of that stuff. So I went through a lot of those different things, and then a lot of the end times things was kind of one of my last areas of like exploration. It's like, okay, Jesus is going to come back on, the whole dispensational thing, the
Right.
whole Schofield Bible, theology. And I fell into that. Yeah, I went from one extreme to the other. It's like the
Right.
Reform group, the dispensational group, the assemblies of God, and
Right.
various, and again, each one had some positive things about it, because people were sincere. I think a lot of them were, not all. Obviously there's some frauds and people like that, and
Right.
the prosperity gospel type of stuff. But I finally just got to, what, I'm just done with all these quote man-made religions, church, things, and I just quit going. Period. And I literally went for like 5 years where I was kind of, I'd say probably closer to, if any religion, it was more like a Quaker, where you just like
Oh,
sit
okay.
there
Yeah.
and you just like kind of wait for the inner light, and you
Right.
just believe that God's going to speak to you and
Yeah.
guide you. And
Kind
it
of
was
passive
very subjective.
contemplative spirituality.
Yeah. And I did that literally for 5 years
Okay.
where I have not stepping foot into any church. They're all, whatever. And I just felt that way because I had so many bad experiences, so many con artist types of things, and so many, like, the end of the world is going to be on May 11th or 21st or whatever date. And then it's like, then the next day they'd be, well, not, well, actually, that just meant, this, and
Yeah.
it's going to happen next month, like, oh, okay, you guys are just ripping everybody off. So I just got to that point where after 5 years, literally, of just not going, sitting home, meditating, and living life, I was like, wow, something, there's a lot missing still. I felt like,
Hmm.
because I did read the Bible, and I had read through it actually several times, from cover to cover. So I had actually read the whole Old and New Testament, different versions of it. And so I had done a lot of Bible study and other theology research basically on my own, praying and just, God help me, and did a lot of spiritual stuff. And I went like in 12-step groups and some of that as well. And so, but finally, I just was like, there's got to be something more. And then by this time, I'm on YouTube. This is now, like 2016.
Uh-huh.
And then I just was like looking, I was looking at different kind of spirituality, and I started looking at something like ancient Christianity. And then I happened to just tap into a video by a man named Ted Nottingham, and he used to be a Disciples of Christ, a First Christian Church, same that I
Okay.
went to, but he used to be a pastor of that. But he was talking about a lot of different spirituality. I mean, he had been talking about Gurdjieff and some of
Oh,
those
wow.
types of
Yeah. The
things.
fourth way.
Yeah, exactly. Fourth way. And that was, to me, was interesting at the time, a lot of things, Enneagrams and all that. But then he actually started talking about the Orthodox Church. And he goes, well, the deepest spirituality is the Christians that have really lost their ways in the West, because it started back in the beginnings of the apostles, and they passed it on. And he was telling me these things. Then he was showing these pictures of these places with all this incense and all these icons, people bowing down, and these women with their headscarves. I'm like,
Right.
wow, where is this? And then I learned a little bit more about it. And so I just started, Orthodox Church. And I was living in the Bay Area at the time, Walnut
Right.
Creek. And so I was like, that's really interesting, that's the ancient church. And then he mentioned things like Mount Athos. And I go, oh, I remember hearing about that. I think I saw something on 60 Minutes about that. And then I remember hearing about the Jesus prayer, and I go, I think I've heard of that too. Desert Fathers. These are
Yeah.
kind of little things kind of
Categories.
clicked. Yeah, in the back of my mind, I was like, oh yeah, I do remember people talking about meditation when they were talking about the Desert Fathers. I didn't even know who they were. I said, oh, they're like out in Egypt or something. I don't know what that means, but interesting. And so when I looked into it, and I says, I wonder if there's an Orthodox church near me. Clickety click, boom, Google search. And I'm like, wow, boom. It's like I'm in the Bay Area. And I was like,
Yeah. Well, Holy
little did I know.
Virgin. Exactly.
Yeah, there was exactly, all these churches all around me. And I was like, yes, I'll go look at them and see what they, drive by, just look inside. Interesting. And then I did, start learning about it, and I started doing online research about it. There's a website called journeytoorthodoxy.com, which is a real good one. And they had a lot of information about it. I spoke with the priest there. And so I just started looking and finding, places that I started visiting, and then I started actually going to church. And just quick aside, like I said, long story short, there was a period, when my wife and I, we had gone to like a Greek festival one time, just living in the Bay Area, it was over in
Right.
Oakland, and not that far from our house. So it was like, oh, we'll go check it out. Music, dancing, food. It's like really, bought some gifts, for my family. And then I remember being there, and I was like, this is really interesting, and I didn't even know that it was a church. At first, I didn't realize that's what he was, but I realized there was one because I started walking through. They had like a bookstore and church, and I even remember having like this kind of Protestant like little pamphlet that I had read about the spiritual peace, that you find from just, going into your space or whatever.
Right.
And they used Bible verses to say it all. So it wasn't like it was just totally new age, but it was like kind of a Quaker type of thing. And I remember walking through there, and I remember setting it down someplace. And I think, oh, maybe one of these guys they'll pick this up and they'll get it. They'll see that they don't need all this religion. So, anyway, so back to, when I finally started looking into it, this was a long time after that Greek festival we'd gone to, and I started going to church, and my wife would come sometimes, and, we would start finally getting into it. And I was like, oh, I learned, did kind of the catechumenate process. And then I remember asking her one day, my wife, I was like, wow, what was that? Remember that Greek festival we went to that one time? That was kind of fun. What, where was that? We should go to one of those again. And she's like, that's the church you're going to. And I'm like, what?
Providence.
Yeah, I know. So anyway, that's back to how I found the church. So I did end up getting, baptized into that church there, the Greek Orthodox Church, the cathedral, basically.
Right.
Ascension Cathedral in Oakland. And then right after that, like 4 days later, I had a job interview, and then I ended up getting a job in Sacramento, California, which is like 70 miles
Right.
east of the Bay Area. And so I
Right.
was like, I got the job. It was a really good job. I really liked it. I was working with the state. And I'd been retired semi at the time. So I was like, I don't really want to go back to work. But God has his ways of taking all your money away from you and taking everything and making you do stuff you don't want to do. Like, what? Go to work. And so that's what happened. So that's how I ended up. Here we are now in Sacramento, and we have like 14 Orthodox churches here. And so, part of all, I'm a part of the main church I go to here, Elevation Holy Cross Church here in Sacramento. And then, I visit, and I'm part of, there's, Ascension, Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Church, is Holy Virgin Mary, Antiochian Orthodox Church. We have Saint Sebastian,
Mm-hmm.
the
Wow.
relics at Saint Sava Orthodox Church in
Oh,
Jackson,
wow.
very
Yeah.
historic place.
I think you mentioned that in one of the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, we have Orthodoxy all over the place. The church in, like I said, growing up in Santa Maria, I didn't even know what a saint was. I realized our football team's called the Saints, and Santa Maria is like, wait a minute, that's Saint Mary, the Virgin Mary. So it all kind of comes full circle.
So how did your, you said you were a screenwriter. How did this all lead to your documentary, American Orthodox? And didn't you have a hand in Sacred Alaska? Can you describe the project for the documentary? How did this get going, and how did this relate to previous skill sets you already had?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was in the military. That was another little piece of my story I didn't mention here, but I was in the military many years ago. And after I got out, I had a lot of issues still, but I did wanted to get into, writing. I'd been writing, as a kid, this kind of a skill set. But then I ended up eventually, writing a book on credit, by accident, because my credit had gotten so bad that I couldn't even like open up a bank account. So I was like, oh, how do you get out of this? And I kept researching. I found somebody who worked at TRW, security people. So I kind of learned how to kind of quote beat the system. And I wrote it all down. So that's how I started writing books. And I wrote a book called Credit Secrets. And I ended up winning a contest with it because it was like, wow, this is a really great book. We really need this to publish it. We'll pay you, And so I was like, what? Okay, and that's how I started writing books. And then I ended up becoming like a spokesperson for Capital One. I wrote a book on, they asked me to write a book on, Holy Virgin Mary, Father Paul Bob. I know him very well. He's probably listening right now. So I just talked to him.
Shout out to Father Paul.
God yes, bless. Father Paul, Father bless. So yeah, so that's I don't know what I was saying, but just the fact that I how did I get to the movie? I started writing books, and like I said, I wrote a book on identity theft, and I became like a spokesperson for Capital One. So I was a pretty prominent author in that space.
Oh, okay.
Many years ago, writing consumer books. I was on all these talk shows, Donahue, and all that stuff. Kind of like the expert on identity theft and on credit and things like that. And so that's how I started writing, books and getting published. But then I ended up going, taking a leave of absence. I was in law school too at the time. And I was like, okay, I'm working, I'm going to law school, I'm writing books. And then they wanted me to do this other one and my publisher. And I was like, okay, I need to take a break off of the law school. So I started writing the book on identity theft I mentioned. And so then I realized there's so many crazy stories. Then 9/11 happened while I was in the middle of finishing it. So that made me think, wow, there's a lot more to identity theft. People are using these IDs to, do these crazy things. It was kind of how I was, experiencing that particular event at the time. I was in law school when it happened, and I was writing that book. And so anyway, so I came years later, having written this book. I decided, what, I'm going to go. I really don't want to go to law school anymore. I don't really want to be a lawyer. I'd rather just write. And I really thought maybe I'd write like screenplays, movies, TV shows. And so that's when I went back to school, got my master's in fine arts in creative writing.
Right.
And my specialization was screenwriting. And so that's why my writing is kind of like fast paced, kind of cinematic, visual. People are like, wow, it's very.
That makes sense now that you say that. I could totally see.
Yeah. And you can write fast when you're doing it that way because you're just writing. Like a movie's 2 hours.
Right.
So you figure that's like a whole lifetime of a story, but you can do it. And not like it takes, I can't write it in 2 hours, but
right.
You're condensing the story into the short period. So that's kind of my style is I write things like I'm writing a movie. And then which is very sparse, basically. And then I go back and I fill in the blanks. Then I've got editors too. I've got several layers. My wife has a PhD, and I've got several friends who are, professional, high educated, writers and people. And then I have my final editor. She worked for Ancient Faith Publishing. And so she kind of gives me the final review and formatting. And so that's why it's kind of as neatly done by the end of it as possible, because I've written it and I've rewritten it. And then I have someone else read it, give me notes. Somebody else read it, give me notes, revise. Someone else revise, give me notes. And then I give it to my final editor, and then she's like, okay, here, you got to totally read. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I do it. I go, accept all. And then I add all the notes, and you get the comments on the side of a Word document. Oh, yeah, change this. Let me research this again. Wait a minute, that's totally incorrect information. And I still, and anyone who's read my writings will know that even after I've done all that, you're going to find some mistakes. Like I said, I'm not young enough to know everything. So I do. Sometimes I think I'm doing things correctly, and I even have people reviewing it and helping me redo it. And then I'll read my books over. I just finished reading this again. I just read this whole thing in one day. Just like, I gotta read this book again because that's like I'm gonna be asked questions and like I don't remember reading that. But anyway, that's how the movie came up. I haven't even answered that question yet.
Right.
So I saw Sacred Alaska a year or so ago when it first came out, and I you know, I have a good friend, and I've been to Fort Ross, I've been to Platina, I've been to all these different
Right.
places in California since I've been here. You know, many of
Yeah.
these
Fort Ross, you
places.
talk about that in this book right here.
Yes,
Same name as the
exactly,
documentary, American Orthodox.
exactly. So that came about. You know, I had been doing research on different saints of North America and just kind of like creating little files and just thinking, oh, that would be a good story to write about. And I had done a book a couple of years back. It's called Road Less Traveled. I didn't write it. This is an anthology of stories of people who become Orthodox.
Oh,
And my story's in there. Many other people. So we did this through our church, and this went through. An editor and to a publisher, you know, who's at St. John Monastery in Manton, you know, sent Divine Ascent Press, and they went to publish it. So it's got all these different stories of people. I recommend it for anyone it's like new to Orthodoxy, because it gives a real basic overview of the church, the history of the church. You know, what does it mean to be Orthodox? It's got the glossary, and then it's got like about a dozen or so stories about people becoming Orthodox. My story's in there, but many others as well. So I kept when I did that, I was like, man, there's so many more stories of people, you know. And I hear your story. I hear, you
yep.
know, I've heard Jay. I've heard many, you know, people who I know, Kyle, you know, people who I know personally, Father Peter. And I go, wow, these stories are so incredible. I think that people should just, you know, be encouraged to tell their stories.
Right.
And when I did this, I couldn't get all the stories that I wanted in there because a lot of people hadn't even become Orthodox by the time I wrote it. Or I didn't write the book, but I, you know, was an
Right.
editor and compiled it and added to it. And I got people to add their stories. So when I saw Sacred Alaska, I was at a friend of mine's house, Robin, in Acantia, Wellman, and she used to work at Fort Ross. And so I knew her, you know, from church. And she wasn't Orthodox at the time that I first knew her, but she would start coming to the church. Um, and you know, she had done some presentations. You know, she'd done presentations about St. Peter. That's how I met her, was from that. She wasn't a member of the church. She was just would come to do presentations about Fort Ross.
Uh-huh.
And so she'd been to Russia and been all these different places, and had this really interesting story, which is talked about in the book and in the movie.
Right.
But and you'll show the trailer on that later. But so how I that connected, she was the one who invited us to her house to meet the director of Sacred Alaska, and we were all going to go to a screening at the theater that day. Kyle was there, and many other people, you know, some people, you know, other priests and so forth
Mhm.
were there at the house. So we all met, and then we went and saw the movie, and I was just so moved by it. Sacred Alaska, anyone who hasn't seen it, highly recommended. It's
Wonderful
online now.
documentary. Yeah.
And that, after I saw that, I was like, wow, that's such a, you know, just I've seen it a couple times. I mean, it almost will bring tears to your eyes just if you really think about it. I mean, just
Yeah.
like, you know, now I just came back from Alaska too, by the way. I think I mentioned to you before we went on.
Yeah.
I was just up there for the glorification of St. Olga. So I was up there, and Robin, who I just mentioned, in Acantia, she was there too. She really is very, very active. Anyone who gets to know her knows that she's the person to know in terms of really wanting to know some of this history and to really get active in some of these events, you know. And they're doing a big 100-year anniversary celebration on October 4th, by the way. It's called Fort Ross
Mm.
Pilgrimage.org. If you go to that, that's another site you might want to, you know, let
Yeah.
people know
Robin
about.
actually reached out. Shout out to Robin. Because she, after I did a review of your book, she reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm the woman with the story about the icon." I go, "What?"
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's a good friend. She lives
Yeah.
here in Sacramento. So Sacramento is, you know, even though people have their issues with California, I do myself. But if you ever get out here, you'll find this is like a heart of Orthodoxy. Fort Ross, 5 saints have been there. You know, St. Peter the Aleut, St. Innocent, St. Tikhon, St. John of San Francisco, and
Yep.
St. Sebastian. You know, it's 5 saints literally stood, you know, and many of them did liturgies and served there. You know, and St. Peter, you know, was a martyr who
Right.
stopped through there on his way down, you know, from Alaska. So that's how I was inspired by Sacred Alaska, though, is after I'd seen it, I kept thinking about it, you know, just like, oh, such a beautiful movie, you know, especially the way that they talked about how that they came to the natives, the missionaries, Saint Herman, who I saw his relics there in Alaska when I was just up there at Kodiak and Spruce Island. And so we went to a unction service right before Pascha that year. If anyone's ever been to that, it's a holy unction is a service where in this case, we had like 7 priests, and they do these long, it's like a vigil kind of a service, but it's all about prayers and it's all about healing, and it's all about the Holy Spirit. And so they actually anoint everybody, all the Orthodox people who came, we go to confession. It's literally a special service that, so we go through that. And I remember going through that service, and this was just a couple months after I'd seen the movie Sacred Alaska. And so I remember coming out of there, and we were all like anointed. They anoint you, like just like when you're chrismated into the church, in the back of your hands, your head, and face, etc. And so we're all like dripping with this oil and filled with the Holy Spirit, literally, not like the, ones that people see on TV kind of thing. And we were walking out, or I was walking out, and I remember talking to a good friend of mine, Peter, who's mentioned actually in the book. James was his name at the time. And we were talking about Sacred Alaska and saying, oh, these are such great stories. We need to do, or somebody needs to do a story like a Sacred California, because we've got all these saints, all these different places. And he goes, oh yeah, it's a good idea, and he was talking about the different saints that have come here. And we talked about St. John of San Francisco and St. Innocent, St. Tikhon, etc., St. Sebastian. And so then they're all like right here. People don't know, most people, even in the Orthodox Church, don't know really that much about all these saints that are here or have been here, throughout, our own country, as well as martyrs, etc. We barely even know a little bit about Alaska. And so anyway, so that whole story just kept gelling in my mind. Then my priest walks out of the church, and we were at the Russian Orthodox Church, Ascension, Holy Ascension Church here in Sacramento at the time. And then the priest from Elevation Holy Cross, which is the OCA church, which is where I go, he comes walking out, and I'm talking to Peter, who goes to that church there too.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, we were just talking about, the Sacred Alaska, and saying, somebody should do like a Sacred California, because all these saints, they come to California, Fort Ross and everything. And my priest looks at me and he goes, well, yeah, you should do that. I'm like, well, no, I didn't. I wanted to do it. I was just, and so I was like, that planted the seed. It's like, oh, okay, means maybe I'll think about it. And he goes, well, you've got a background, writing and movies and stuff. I'm like, yeah, but I didn't, argue with him about it. I just didn't plan on thinking I was going to do anything. And so I talked to a couple other priests and friends, and everybody's like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, maybe, not Sacred California, because those 2 words don't seem to go together.
Yeah.
Maybe Orthodox California or something like that. Yeah, it might be better. And then eventually I started thinking, well, it's not just about California, because it's, these are saints for all of North America. So I don't really want it to just be a regional stories, even though it's, we're focusing on, what's your location, what's the main characters. Yeah, so I do a movie. It's like, okay, location, character, what's the main story, beginning, middle, end, hero's journey, all that stuff. And then I create it around a central place and a location and theme and etc. and a time frame. And so that's where I decided, oh, well, American Orthodox, because that's a bigger story. And I think, originally I was thinking, oh, we could do one about Father Seraphim Rose. We could do one about Elder Ephraim. We could do one about, Saint, Raphael of Brooklyn. There's so many saints. Saint Sebastian has his own story. He was baptized on a Russian naval ship during the Civil War off the coast of San Francisco. It's like, can you picture what are these Russians doing on our coast during the Civil War? You'd never know what part of the Civil War they were supporting.
Right.
Yeah, it's a whole nother one to get into it, but right. A lot of these stories, I was like, what? You learn this stuff. And I grew up in California, and our California history doesn't tell us any of this stuff. We learned about some of the missions, Spanish missionaries, etc. I didn't know anything about the Russian part of it, or Fort Ross, or any of these saints, or had never heard of the Orthodox Church, and I didn't even know what a saint was, even though that was the name of our football team, Santa Maria Saints. And, I wasn't Catholic, so I didn't even really know who Saint Mary was, really. I kind of knew, yeah, well, it's, Mary, from the Bible. But, you don't really give her a lot of attention,
Right.
unfortunately, because we don't, growing up, it's not an emphasis on
Right.
other people like that.
Right.
So
Well,
anyway, that's how the movie came about, is I decided to do it. I said, well, I'll come up with a script and kind of an idea about how I would do it, create what we call a treatment, sort of it's kind of like a PowerPoint presentation sort of a thing. And then people were saying, well, you need to get somebody who's a cinematographer. And I go, well, it's not really me. I mean, I can take a picture on my phone, but I'm not going to do a movie like that. I need somebody. And they were like, well, who would you want to do it with? I go, well, if I was going to do something like this, I really want to do it with the people from Sacred Alaska.
right.
And Robin, knew them, introduced me. And Simon, who's the director, he was busy, but we touched base. He was interested in the idea. But Silas, who's the producer and also cinematographer and editor of Sacred Alaska, he was available, and he was like, "Oh, that's a good idea." And we went back and forth, and we're like, "Well, when would you want to do it?" And I go, "Well, whenever we can all get together." And then Robin was in Russia, at the time, and then I had another friend, Theodosius, who was in the military intelligence person. He was like all overseas and doing all kinds of secret stuff. But he was a very good, he was like public relations, public information officer too, which is how they present themselves to, give out information. And so he we all got together and were all available for like a 1 week period. And we literally all got together, went to 10 different locations: San Francisco, Sacramento, Fort Ross, Santa Rosa, Jackson. And we got all these different priests, got nuns, we got monasteries, we got cathedrals, we got Fort Ross, all these interviews, literally shot and done in like a week.
Wow.
And then the rest of it was like editing. I mean, a lot of it was pre-production, which is like you're
Right.
basically planning all this stuff. And then it's like people coming from all these different places. Okay, so you got to come back from Russia. Silas is in Colorado Springs, which is where I was in the military, by the way, in Fort Carson. And my other friend, Theodosius, he was coming back from the Middle East or wherever he was. And he had gotten back, or Germany, I forget where he was exactly, but he was stationed there at Fort Carson in Colorado too. So I mean, it's literally the logistics of just basically paying everybody, gathering them, organizing it. That's what, I was the executive producer and I was the director of the movie. And so I basically had to do a lot of it myself. But I mean,
Wow.
Silas was the cinematographer and Theodosius was the camera operator. So we had drones, we had all kinds of high level equipment, editing, and everything, all that technical stuff, which is out of my pay range. I'm like not that person who's
Right.
has all these different lenses and lights and
yeah,
all
you're
that
the
stuff.
Luddite still writing with a quill pen
Yeah, the
on
quill pen.
yellow paper.
Yeah, exactly. Here, write a movie about this.
Well,
Now I just
why
say,
don't
write a movie about this and then give it to the people. And then
yeah. I've shown the trailer before, but why don't we dive into it for everybody watching?
Sure.
And then we can comment on it and
Okay.
and maybe ask a few questions. Anybody has questions in the chat, feel free. But it does have the same quality and feel of Sacred Alaska, and that's I think our men's group next month. I was wanting to do a viewing of the documentary for our parish because we meet once a month, just the men's group.
Oh yeah.
But here is the link for American Orthodox Film. I'm going to share this in the chat for everybody watching now and in the future. Here's the link to the website, and this has updates and all types of stuff. Keep you up to date on John's work and the documentary
If
itself.
you look at the updates link on there, by the way, you don't have to read it, but right there,
on.
click on that.
Yep.
Just real quick. I just want to show people. That tells like the screenings that are coming up. Like we're going to do at the monastery in Calistoga, like this Sunday, and then the next week, Elevation Holy Cross in Sacramento, etc. And then if you look down, you'll see where it's won some festivals. It's won like best documentary, best director, and some of that stuff. That's just information that's down below.
Wow, winner of best male director. Did they ask you how you identified before giving you the award?
Yeah, male, female, right? Yeah, that was it. That was it. Only the
And a 2025 Christian Online Film Festival winner. So,
yeah,
oh, and you have a Valam Monastery screening June.
I
Oh, it
just did
already
that.
happened.
Yeah,
Oh, cool.
and that was with Kyle, and then that was with John Here's down there. And
Oh,
there's
cool.
hey,
And
I know
there's
that one.
today. Hey.
No, that was
Oh, no, that was when I
a couple
did the
months ago.
review, didn't it?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, of the book. Okay,
Yeah, I'll
that's
put
May
this one.
19th.
I'll put this one in there when we get it done. It'll be there. So anyway,
Oh,
I'm just
cool.
mentioning the updates because people want to say, "Oh, where's the screening next?" And also, how do you contact us? And so back to you. If you go back to the homepage, our email is down there at the bottom, and you can just contact us there if you want to screen the film. Those are some of the awards down
Man,
there at
look
the
at all
bottom.
these awards. Holy crap.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So back to you want to show the
Yeah, just the
trailer.
just the trailer for the documentary, just for
Yeah.
everybody watching now and in the future, relates to the conversation. So here is the 2-minute trailer for American Orthodox, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it with John.
St. Peter gave his life for Christ.
That story of his courage as a young man, it shows how the cross is something that we embrace in our weakness.
Christ, Jesus Christ our God, hallowed this land in the streams of Peter's blood.
People are hungry. The world is very loud and noisy.
People are dissatisfied. They're restless. And they're looking for answers to that restlessness.
People in general have a sense that something's not right. There's not enough.
They are burdened with this question: what is my identity? Who am I? When Peter the Aleut was being persecuted, he kept repeating over and over again, all the stories say, I am a Christian.
This is Holy Land because of the saints.
Faith is something lived, and it's something that we enter into. We want to know God.
We're saved by people like St. Peter. We're saved by everyone who bears their cross.
All right. So first question is, when is it available for purchase for general public?
Well, right now it's still going through like film festivals, so it'll be a while before it's like generally available. However, it is free to any parish, school, seminary, Orthodox, like OCF, types of groups, etc. Um, they just contact us, we're from such and such parish, our group wants to screen the film, and it's free. I just send you a private link that's just available only just for you to show it there. Let us know when it's going to be. That's why I put it on the updates page. But it'll probably be next year before it's like totally, like uploaded to like whether we go to Amazon Prime and some of those types of things.
What's the process in making, because you're talking about it has to go through the film festival, like what is the process of making a documentary? Because one of the leading questions I want for this to dovetail into is encouraging other people. I recently just spoke with a guy who went to film school, and he has the ability to create films and documentaries, and he was wanting to maybe get into apologetics because he wants to help the faith. And I was encouraging him to think about, dude, utilize your film ability and think about creating apologetic content or historical informational content through that medium. So could you speak a little bit about what is the process? How do you get the funding to create a film like this? And what is, as you're talking about moving through the film festival, what is that process?
Yeah, there's a lot of different options, different ways of doing filmmaking these days. Fortunately, with the digital types of filmmaking, it's not like it used to be. I mean, even the word film is kind of a misnomer, because it's like, just like when you talk about a printing press, we're not, so and so press. We're not pressing out movies. We're not like filming with actual film. So you could literally, if you were super low budget, I mean, you can literally make a film with the quality of technology on an iPhone if you want. And that's not what we did here. But the basic process is, in my opinion, at least, of how to do it. I mean, I used to teach screenwriting. So, I mean, screenwriting is more for like if you're writing like a narrative, a story, you're taking a novel, or you're taking an event and you're dramatizing it with actors and so forth. Whereas a documentary, it's more, it's not necessarily a screenplay, because it's not like people have lines that they're going to be speaking. You're basically outlining, here's what it is. You outline, what are the locations, what are the, who are the subjects, if you're going to be interviewing them, what's the style you're going to do it in? Is it going to be like where you're just narrating the whole thing, one person is voiceovering the whole thing? We're in this case, I don't narrate anything. It's just the people, that we interview, and we take all that footage of all those interviews, which, we had like 10 interviews, many priests and, nuns and a couple regular people, lay people. And we went to different, 10 different locations. And so it's like, you got like a lot of footage. And so you basically are just putting all that together, but you starting it with, you have kind of your outline. This is the story that I want to tell. And what I always encourage people to do, whether you're doing fiction or nonfiction, just like, I'm writing a lot of nonfiction, books, just like this movie documentary is a nonfiction, but it's still about stories. And so telling it in a way where you're not just going, name, date, location, date, this happened, this happened, this happened. You know what I mean? You don't dryly, like a history lesson, the best history classes, and I'm sure you've taken more than your share of them, it's where they really tell you the story.
Right. The context,
it's like
filling you into the context of it.
Yeah, exactly. So like, for example, I'll give you just a subtle piece of the story. I mean, this story about Fort Ross and Robin, and I won't tell you her whole story, because we had several other people involved in it. But, she had worked there for 30 years, and then she had gotten laid off, and she was not Orthodox. And so again, I'm not going to give her whole story away, but on the last day before she had a bit delay. She was still working there. The last few days, she was walking along the beach, and then she saw something she thought was like trash. Oh, somebody put trash. So she's very, she's like a historian in the park, person, not a park ranger per se, but a, history interpreter is her technical title. But she was basically a historian. She would do presentations and she would do all that stuff. Anyway, she saw something on the beach. And she was just kind of walking along, feeling really sad because she was losing her job that she'd been there for all this time. And then all of a sudden she sees something. She says, "Oh, I gotta go pick that up, whatever it is." And she looks, and then she digs, and it's like, wait a minute. And it was an icon, and there was this not just like a little something someone tossed away. It was like a huge hand-painted, hand-done big icon of St. Peter the Aleut. And so what happens next?
Right, that's the suspense. If you guys listen to my overview of this book, you may have a little bit of an inkling, but it's a phenomenal story.
Right.
That's why when Robin reached out afterwards and said, "Oh, that's me," and I was like, "Oh, wait, this is," because it's it's just a disembodied entity when I read it, not knowing who they are, and the fact that she reached out afterwards and was like, "That's me." I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's incredible."
Yeah. Well, let me give you another little, it's like what they call an Easter egg, this kind of little hidden gem that you may not know even after you watch the movie, I'm telling you right now, there's a little secret old thing you'll see there, is that when they came to Fort Ross, this was the year, they'd been to Alaska, like 1794 was when the missionaries went from Catherine the Great, St. Herman, and all those went to Alaska. And then years later, when they came down like fishing vessels, basically the Russian American company, and they came down to California, which, was still, really kind of semi-Spanish territory at the time, wasn't really a state, wasn't part of America. But the year was 1812. And if you know anything about classical music or history, 1812 is a very
right.
If anyone's heard the 1812 overture, which a lot of times it's funny because sometimes you hear the 1812 overture during 4th of July because it's such it's got this canon. Dun, 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 da, 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 da.
Yeah.
But what people don't know, that was the year that they came to California, came to this part of North America. And what a lot of people also don't know, and I didn't know this until I started researching it a little bit more, is that the 1812 overture by Tchaikovsky, the beginning part of it is actually, it's a choral part, and it's actually the Troparion of the Cross. It begins, God save thy people and bless thine inheritance. And that's, the Troparion cultures most of us have heard, but that's actually the beginning of 1812 overture. So you think about that, and 1812 the year, because actually what was happening, that story is about, the War of 1812, and it was actually about Napoleon had invaded Russia, and they basically chased him back, and he ended up becoming exiled.
Right.
Which, some things, like they say, history repeits itself, or as they
or at
say,
least
it rhymes. Rhymes. So that's kind of so that's Macron is. Oh no, don't get me started on history. But anyway, I'm just saying that was 1812. So I'm just saying that music 1812 overture, it kind of hinted in there a little bit. So that was all I was trying to say.
How do you get funding? If somebody's listening and is inspired by your work, and maybe they're able to see one of the screenings of the documentary, what would be your advice to somebody who has the prerequisite skill set to do films? What would be your advice on how to get, because the thing that I've heard when I've always mentioned it to somebody is like, yeah, but I don't know how to get funding for it.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that's why I was saying before, is in this day and age, theoretically, there's a lot of technology that if people have, equipment, or especially if you have friends and people who will work together with you, you can supply something. Like in my case here, I'm the director and the executive producer. So I was basically in charge of the whole thing. So fortunately, I had some funding available just from my own pocket, so to speak. Obviously, everybody doesn't have that. I'm not saying everybody should just fund their whole film by themselves, because that's not an easy thing to do. But if you can actually create something where the cost is relatively low, basically, and then in a case like this, you're paying people to do things you're not able to do. Like I need somebody, cinematographer, I need, really, in this case, I need like 2 camera people. And they already have their equipment, so I'm not paying to buy a bunch of equipment.
Right.
In some cases you may have to rent something that you don't have, but you're basically paying those people for their time, their skill sets, and lodging, food, and so that's why I say we were able to do this thing in like 5 days, literally a week. And so I basically, so you create your budget based on what is it really going to take to do this thing. And so you try to minimize it, by starting with, okay, what's the minimum locations, if I can do everything in one place, or just 2 or 3 places, for low cost. That's how I tell people to do it. Try to create the limited locations, limited budget. And then obviously, even that, it can cost, tens, or many thousands of dollars. I mean, low budget is still considered like $1 million is nowadays considered a low budget movie.
Right.
So yeah, this is definitely low, even micro budget from what I was able to put together. But what some people will do is, once you have something that you could present to people, which may include, like say in this case here, and this is not what I did, because I literally did not get outside funding, but I got people who I could pay them to do the things that they did. And they had, like I said, the expertise and the equipment, and they were available for a limited amount of time.
Right.
And so some of the locations, you're outside, so you're doing a lot of things. You're not paying to I mean, there's some places where, you should get a permit, et cetera.
Right. But what you're saying is the way that you were kind of able to skirt some of the costs was by contracting individuals that had specific skill sets and equipment already available.
Right.
And then so you were kind of paying individuals to help put it together. And my recommendation for somebody, and correct me if you feel differently, is to put together, at least put together a project that you could present. And there's so many of us content creators that would help promote and create a GoFundMe page and just be dependent upon, $5, $10, $20 donations and just go it that way, instead of thinking about you won't start until you get all this money. Just go ahead and start, and at least get some type of project together that you can present to people that could inspire them to want to contribute and donate and fund your project.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always the next thing I was going to say is, like, once, you realize, okay, this is going to be beyond my personal budget, friends, family, you ask, some people who to contribute, and maybe some people even donate some of their time and expertise, or at least, you pay them, here, I want to pay your way out here. I'm going to give you food and, pay you for something that you're doing, and you do as much as you can of yourself, because then you're in control of it. Because the more control you give away, like if you're saying, well, I'm going to wait till I get like some investor, then that investor basically it's their project. And then they'll tell you, oh, we decided, instead of being about saints, it's going to be about the stewardesses and the Lakers cheerleaders, it's kind of the same story that you started with, but we're going to do our spin on it. And it's but since we're paying for it, we get to do what we want. And so you don't want it to go to that extreme. But like on the other side, as you said, you can go to Indiegogo, Kickstarter, crowdfunding. And if you have enough that you can show people, which has to be, you have to at least be able to do like a presentation and say, okay, here's what we're trying to do. I mean, just like I'd like somebody to do, just like when I saw Sacred Alaska, I was inspired. Okay, I want to do a movie about, California. So if somebody wants to do a movie about, St. Anthony's in Arizona, or they want to do a movie about, Indiana, or St. Raphael of Brooklyn, or Seraphim Rose, which is actually part of what we were going to do with this film. People were asking, oh, so you're going to go up to Platina? And, which we're obviously going to talk about Platina.
Right. Yeah, we're getting ready to dive into it.
I couldn't put all that together in that period of time. So it was like, because that's a whole day or two by itself. And, I definitely had an outline where I could do a whole movie about Seraphim Rose. I mean, that's to me, and I would encourage anyone who wants to do one. That's one reason why I wrote the book too, because I said, at least if nothing else, I have, these stories, put in a place where you can kind of see a story arc.
Right.
That's why I write it the way I do, cinematically. So that, not saying, anyone else can just make up their own versions of it, because I don't have any rights, just like, nobody has the rights to Seraphim Rose's story.
Right.
And nobody has the only rights to the story of St. Peter or St. John of Shanghai. But you have your own unique way of telling the story. And so, if people get into copyright and trademarks and all that stuff, that's a whole other area there, but the main thing I would say is just do what you can, because you can just put it on paper, here's the story, and then create like a presentation, like a pitch deck, basically.
Right.
Just like if you're pitching, a story to your boss and say, here's a project I want to do. And you look at it from, here's what it's going to take, here's the time frame, here's how long it takes, here's what we need. And you really think about it, budget wise, let's budget, let's say $100,000 in this case. That should cover the cost of flying people out, paying people. I mean, we had a good friend, Christine, she's a good friend of mine, and she came and she helped. And a lot of people just volunteer because they just want to be a part of it. And they would come and they'd bring food and they'd buy sandwiches. And that's what she was doing, and just do a lot of public relations. So they, people like that, she's probably listening now too. It's like, these are really good friends. Like, many of the people who I've mentioned, You get people like that who really are just dedicated to the mission, and people will do things because they want to do it more than, oh, how much am I going to get out of it?
Right.
And obviously, you're paying people for their time. I don't encourage people to say, oh, well, I need you to do all this work for free.
Right.
I'm just like you're a professor, and PhD, and people, you have a valuable skill set. There's people who would pay, just to let me sit down with you for an hour and learn about such and such. And just like I used to teach creative writing, so I was an I was a adjunct professor, which in fact, my wife works at CIIS, which is a college, California Institute for Integral Studies, which used to be the American Asian Institute for Asian Studies, which is where Seraphim Rose went, and where he met.
Well, that's a perfect transition into Voice in the Wilderness, because what you're getting into, the life of Father Seraphim Rose is kind of the central thrust of this book. And I wanted to begin not chronologically or in the narrative format that you presented in the book, but the piece that, again, my personal favorite, I guess, at least the point that is like, oh, that's where I want to start the conversation with John. And it's on page 84. And it has to do with, what does man seek in religion? And in this chapter, John is going over a presentation that Father Seraphim Rose is giving at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And in attendance, again, this is what I loved about your book, because it connected dots that I just wasn't aware of, that in attendance to this particular lecture was Abbot Damascene. So anybody who's familiar with Christ the Eternal Tao, Metropolitan Jonah, who I personally met at Montanica and spent time with, Bishop Garrison and Bishop James, all present as secular, non-Orthodox people at this particular presentation by Father Seraphim. And the question that is being posed is, what does man seek in religion? Now, obviously, I have a religious studies degree, and so this is a huge general concept that secular academics are trying to answer, and then the definitions of religion, constantly trying to redefine what religion is. But I want to read this section because I thought it was really powerful. And you said, the question Father Seraphim posed to the students was simple yet profound. What is man seeking in religion? For many in that room, the answer might have been wisdom, peace, enlightenment, or even escape from suffering. These were the same things I had sought in my own spiritual journey, but Father Seraphim challenged them, and by extension, me, to look deeper. Quote, man seeks reality, he said. He seeks something beyond the changing, fleeting nature of this world. But too often he looks in the wrong places. He looks for experiences, for feelings, for supernatural signs. But these things can deceive. How well I knew that deception. I had pursued religious experience, mystical highs, moments of transcendence, the feeling of connection to something greater. I had believed that the path to truth lay in altered states of consciousness. Again, resonating quite deeply with myself and my own journey. In secret knowledge and finding the right teacher or the right method. But even when I reached what I thought I were spiritual heights, I was left with the same aching emptiness. Father Seraphim spoke directly to that misplaced longing. He told the students that what they should be seeking was not an experience, but truth. Not just intellectual truth, but truth that transforms, the truth that enters the heart and changes the person from within. Truth is not an abstraction, he said. Truth is a person. And when the heart encounters Christ, everything changes. And so I love that, because it's going to talk, to me, that little section connects with everything in the book, whether it be the UFOs, whether it be the New Age spirituality, psychedelics, drugs, the occult. But also towards the end of it, you're talking about the meaning crisis, right? And so people in our culture, somebody like Dr. Jordan Peterson, is trying to talk about the meaning crisis and solve the meaning crisis, and uses particularly Orthodox Christianity as an allegory, as some type of symbol set that can help, if you speak truth and you order the world and make your bed, and then look at the mythology. I mean, he doesn't use those terms, but you may have seen recently, within the last month, he was pushed in a debate and said that I'm not a Christian. I've never claimed to be one. And yet so many people view him as, and so they're talking about the meaning crisis, and yet the prescriptions they're offering are very much just sort of pragmatic solutions and kind of orderliness in one's life. And the point of religion and the point of the meaning crisis is that people are divorced from reality itself. they're living in a sort of phantasma fantasy of what they think the world is, how it works, and this connects with your section on nihilism and the whole intellectual trajectory of the West. So I was wondering, I don't even have the exact question formulated for you exactly, but what are your thoughts on, I guess, a larger perception on what's happening in America regarding orthodoxy, the meaning crisis, and why people are finding a solution in orthodoxy as a religious solution?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because I kind of alluded to like some of my own personal stories. I had, like many people and yourself included, done some explorations, searching, trying different things and keeping your mind open and thinking people, focusing on different parts of reality, I guess, is the
Right.
thing. And that includes, here's the answers over here or over there. Or conversely, here's the problem over here or over there. And that's, I saw something recently, Jamie Henshaw, actually, just as an aside, just made me think about it when I saw that. It's like she created this pyramid. I don't know if you've seen it, kind of like a Maslow pyramid, but it's like, it's not the hierarchy of needs, but it's like she starts with the bottom is like, this is yourself. This is the problem, basically, yourself. And it's got these different levels of different groups and different issues. And then the top of the pyramid is God. And that's really the solution.
Right.
And so I'm saying that to say that like halfway in between, you've got like these different groups. You say, oh, the problem is these people, white males or
Right.
minorities, or it's the boomers or the Jews or the Jesuits or whatever. And it's like you get stuck at a place where even if you can say, well, yeah, I can see why some people in this particular group, do sometimes create some problems. But when you do these generalizations and you just take no responsibility for your own life,
Right.
and you say, oh, all the problems are because of this group of people here or there, or you think the whole solution is here or there. Well, if I just had the right girlfriend or the right job or the right amount of money, if my Bitcoin hits $500,000, life will be perfect. And maybe it will, but those are external things. And those external groups, demographics, techniques, etc. And so that's back to the question is, I think most people, especially in this time frame that we're in now, where everything is very much sped up, because it's like information has sped up, so fast, the travel, people used to not, go very far in their
Right.
lives, for thousands of years. Most people lived in one little community and they never really ventured out more than, a few hundred, miles at the most.
Right.
Even like the biblical times. I mean, we're talking about these journeys, these are people walking or
Right.
sitting on horses and donkeys doing these things. So it's like, okay, we just went to Alaska, you can go to Moscow, you can go to, wherever you want in a day, and you could talk to 1,000 different people instantly with just a few clicks, and you can get all this information from 1,000 different places. Even like I said, back in quote my day, you at least have to go down to the library or a bookstore and you actually buy a book, read it, get it out of the library, and then actually talk to people, face to face. We didn't even have like cell phones or internet. And so I think that's part of the problem, is because there's so much bombardment that people are just overwhelmed. And it's like, there's so much noise that it's like, oh, you're just overwhelmed by it. And unfortunately, so much of it is just misinformation, disinformation, manipulation. We're just always like trying to, like they say, if it bleeds, it leads, so the whole news is just constant, the world's coming to an end, and the churches many are doing the same thing. Jesus is going to come back. And if you don't do this, give us this money now, or support this group or that country or whatever, there's going to be nuclear war. And it's like, okay, maybe, you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. But, we live our lives the best way we can. And I think people are seeking, some kind of peace and truth, and they want to live a life that actually has meaning. Like we talked about the meaning crisis, because it's like, okay, what does it mean? Is it all about just some ideology? Is it all about like down with this group of people? Oh, these are the evil people. It's all hate. This demographic, whether it's their color of their skin or their age group or their ethnicity, and you put yourself into a place where you're just in a constant state of blame and pride and vanity, anger, all these different, what we call passions, because all you're doing is you're just feeding into your own sickness, so to speak, and I'm guilty of it, because that's my whole life is built around pursuing pleasure, or pursuing money, or power, something, try to be the big shot. And I still have that, obviously, doing one of these things that they do, like writing books, making movies, teaching as a college professor. It's hard to do some of those things without feeling like, oh, I'm so, whatever, and I try not to let it get to my head, but unfortunately, it still does. And I'm like, oh, I want more people to see this and make sure they know that I'm the one that did it. And and forgive me, like I said, I'm not, as I say, I'm not young enough to know everything. So it's like, I know I make a lot of mistakes. And in any book you read of mine, you'll see errors in it. You'll say, oh, this guy doesn't even know what he's talking about. And and you're right, because I really know very little. I'm not an expert, and I don't even want to. Definitely with this book regarding Seraphim Rose, I am far from the quote expert about Father Seraphim Rose. I know very, very little compared to most of the people who I actually write about in the book. People like Father Paul Baba, Father Peter Heers, Bishop Gerasim, Justin Marler, Father John Valadez. These are people who I talk about, who did, like Death of the World, and some of these things that were, Father Turbo, many of these people who were influenced way, way, way before I even became part of the church, and people who actually knew Father Seraphim themselves. So I'm not, a person who's claiming to be an expert, on Orthodoxy. I'm not a priest. I'm not a scholar, or historian. I can tell stories, and I can write, and as you said, write pretty prolifically, quickly, because it's kind of my background is having done this for like, more than 30 years of writing, books, and being, a screenwriter and a professor. And so I focus on, how do you write a movie or a book, show, don't tell, get to the beginning, middle, and end, who's the main character, what's the main thing, and boom, 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 use the hero's journey if you can, to use a certain, template of, different kinds of metaphors, etc. All the stuff that I throw in there to make it, like the writing to be poetic, kind of a hypnotic, you get pulled into the story, type of a thing. Not and doing it in a positive way, because bottom line is, all these things which, kind of back to your question, there's a lot of noise, very little, the signal, it could be very quiet, like the still small voice. You have to quiet yourself, and we're out there walking a vertical or a horizontal path, looking over here, looking over there. Oh, there's the new age, Messiah here. Oh, here's the new, UFO guru. Oh, here's the new AI gods now. These are, Mecca, who. Craziness, the world's got insane. I don't care what, you have to say about that, but it's just, and the reality it's always been crazy, you go back to look at Noah's Ark and Noah's flood. It was like that then. Sodom and Gomorrah, even Noah, Adam and Eve, they were, here you are in the garden, you got everything all perfect, but you're like, oh, hey, let's look and see what's over here and listen to, wait, did God really say X, Y, Z? Well, let me think about it. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should go your way. And you end up, and then you got Cain and Abel, doing offerings, and all these stories, and David and Goliath, you got Abraham, you got Isaac, Jacob, you've got all these wild and crazy stories. And you think about all the places these people were in, Babylon and Egypt, and many beautiful people, and even some of these quote evil empires, good things come out of them all. Look, Egypt has so many Christians. I think it was like Persia, the king of Persia, Cyrus. He actually helped the nation of Israel. Here, okay, we'll let you guys rebuild your temple. I mean, so these are people that you can't just put good guys and bad guys in categories.
Right.
And so I think that's part of it, is you have to sometimes slow down and say, okay, God, help me. I don't know what I'm doing. And help me see truth. Help me, be the person you want me to be. Thy will be done. And
Right.
sometimes it's just that simple prayer, God help me.
I want to flip now back again. One of the comments I made earlier about your books is it connects dots for me that, again, I wasn't aware as Orthodox. And what I mentioned to you backstage was towards the beginning, you talk a little bit about the Holy Order of Mans. And I have not even done a stream on that on this channel. So that has got to be a stream topic in the future, is talking about, could you speak a little bit about what the Holy Order of Mans is, and how, again, they got ingratiated into the Orthodox faith, and maybe the role of Father Maximus Rossi? Because after hearing a little bit of that, I think it was the second or third chapter, you were talking about that in the book. And he reposed in 2022, and I had already been a baptized Christian for a few years at that point. I'm thinking, geez, I didn't even know this man existed, didn't know the background story. And it is almost like a piece of my own journey and a potential connection with Orthodox fathers, Orthodox clergy that I totally missed out on. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Yeah. Father, well, he was Vincent Rossi, and he was part of, among others, this group called the Holy Order of Mans. And later it became a kind of more of a brotherhood of, Christ the Savior brotherhood. And so this was like a trajectory of these people, kind of like hippies, that we talk about, like in the 60s types of, I don't know exactly, I can't remember the exact year. It started like in the 60s. I don't know the exact year. But it was like what we would call today, we would probably call it a cult, but it was basically people who, they were doing the best they could with it. So I don't say it in a negative way, because the word cult is part of like culture. It's a group, with had, people hierarchies, and like, okay, we're going to try to be the what God is always wanted people to be. And people sincerely have been doing that for a long time. And I think even people who, many of the quote hippies that were looking in the psychedelic realm, many deceived, obviously, through like Timothy Leary, CIA, MK Ultra, LSD and all that stuff.
Right.
But many people were just saying, well, there's got to be more than what we're seeing in the world. This materialism, whether it's capitalism, communism, all those different ideologies, economies, just chasing after, pleasure or greed or whatever it is.
Right.
So anyway, that's what they were a very small group originally. I don't know the total numbers that they got to, but it became large. And it was basically people, they did like homeless shelters, they did soup kitchens. And so they were really, helping people, in the streets of San Francisco, for the most part, and other places. And so they would have houses, and people would be like a crash pad, so people come in all crazy and down out, and they would have a place to live, as opposed to just, oh, here, just go sleep on the streets. Here's a tent, go camp out in front of City Hall or in front of somebody's store. No, they would like, here, come on in, we'll feed you, here's food, and then people would help them, and they would like start like a restaurant, and they would have these little businesses and so forth. And it became actually, that's why I said it can be kind of considered a cult in a sense, because they had at least, they became like priests and priestesses, and they would take pieces of different religions and create these various, offices and hierarchies. And they would, how those things can have a lot of power dynamics and greed and money, and they would own property, etc. So anyway, so what happened? Vincent Rossi becoming one of the higher ups in that. And he started, as they all were, really kept searching, and he started seeing the Orthodox Church, which, like a lot of us, had never even heard of it. And so he started seeing it, and he eventually found his way out to Platina, met with, I think it was Bishop Gerasim and some of the early people part of it. I don't think he actually was part of it with Seraphim Rose directly. If I recall correctly, like I said, I'm not a super historian, but I have the bottom line of that story is that this whole group, a large percentage of it, they all became Orthodox. and many of them came into different parts of the church. You know, some became part of the OCA, like Bishop Garras, some, you know, is in the OCA. Some became part of ROCOR. Some went to the Antiochian church, and many people, you know, groups of people had started coming into these different parts of the church. And then some of them were into kind of these schismatic offshoots. And there was a lot of controversy, a lot of stuff that was going on, you know, with the monasteries and different things like that. But I did meet Father Maximus, you know, who was formerly, you know, Vincent Rossi, and he was a very prolific writer. He became, you know, he went to seminary. I think it was St. Vladimir's, I believe, and he was, you know, very brilliant man. He did a lot of writing, you know, about ecology and about spirituality, and all this from like an Orthodox perspective. You know, very prolific writer himself. You know, a lot of like papers and, you know, professional, you know, scholarly works. And so he then eventually, you know, became a monastic and helped found St. Silouan Monastery in Sonora, which is, it's now known as St. Catherine's Monastery. He changed over because he died a few years ago, as you mentioned. I was fortunate. I had met him a few times. I'd been there. It was not far from Sacramento. And I had met Father Ignatius, you know, who was the abbot, and Bishop James, who we mentioned earlier. He's the actual abbot of that monastery.
Yeah.
You know, he spend most of his time in San Francisco, which is where all the headquarters and the you know, Archbishop Kirill and all the people, he's part of ROCOR. But he's the abbot of now St. Catherine's Monastery in Mother Catherine. You know, it's a beautiful place. You know, it's something I recommend anyone doing pilgrimages to California not only go to Fort Ross or go to Platina, you know, which is St. Herman of Alaska Monastery, which is where Father Seraphim Rose was, you know, but the Savas and Jackson, it's actually near there. It's not that far from there if you're ever out this way. So that's what happened. Then he became tonsured as a monk right before, you know, his. I mean, he was a monk, you know, what they call Rasifor. There's different levels of it, but he had gotten the next level up right before his death, you know, and so I went to the funeral.
And I brought that up because in the book, you note the influence, the massive influence Father Seraphim Rose has had on people coming out of the New Age. And so the Holy Order of Mans, like you said, kind of a hippie, semi-cult type thing. Eventually, they moved towards Orthodoxy. It sounded like some of them went the evangelical Orthodox route, the sort of schismatics. And then eventually they get grafted and brought back into the true church. And I think this is one of the reasons why, and I'll open a larger question on why you think this, or what is the significance, or why do you think Father Seraphim Rose is so significant? But one of the leading into it, I mean, so many people are coming out of the occult, the New Age, the spiritual but not religious, and to see Father Seraphim Rose with his former relationship with Alan Watts before he converts, his interest in Chinese, learning Chinese, being able to read Chinese. Of course, he was kind of the inspiration that Abbot Damascene ends up finishing Christ the Eternal Tao. And so he's a great bridge into modernity. And when you read his stuff, or I've refinished some of his lectures because the audio quality was so bad, it's still so prescient in 2025. That whether you read nihilism or Genesis, creation and early man, or Orthodoxy, religion of the future, the soul after death, all of which are sitting right over here. Father Seraphim seems to be somebody that is so much more relatable for the average American convert because some of his past and some of the mistakes he made. And so obviously I kind of already answered the question, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, having written the book, having, you know, you do basically an overview of all his works and kind of describe what they are and what's in it and what he's trying to argue. Why do you think Father Seraphim Rose is such an important figure and so influential still today for American converts?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And he has a very singularly powerful influence I would say, if you just, many people, would say, well, who would we say would be a saint, in America, and many people, he would be one named.
Right.
I'm not going to say,
And it
oh,
sounds
he's
like
a saint.
The Georgian diocese has already
Yes.
elevated him. They're the only one
One,
though,
yeah.
correct?
Yeah. One, yeah. Diocese there, Metropolitan Nicolos there, who I met, and he was there at the 40th anniversary of Father Seraphim's repose, which was in 2022, because he reposed in 82. So yeah, there are many people and there are icons that have him with a halo. So I'm not, again, this is not me saying that he should be a saint per se, although I do bring up that question in one of the
Yeah.
chapters.
It's like next
So
to
I
the
don't,
last chapter, your case for canonization.
yeah, because if people do make the argument, and many people have good reasons why. And back to your question, that's his influence, whether he's considered a saint or not. Even if if people say, well, no, he really didn't live that great of a life, da 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 da. The influence is still the influence. The people became Orthodox. Many people, and I know people. I mean, even like Father Peter here, for example, is very influential. For
Right.
whatever different reasons he's able to reach so many people. But he says that he read Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, and that was what got him to become Orthodox. And I know people, other people. I know a woman who was a nun in the Catholic Church, and she worked in the library at the church, and she was kind of frustrated with what the church was doing. Some of the directions she felt it was not the same as when she had taken her vows, years before
Right.
that. And in her library, she had an early version of the life of and works of Father Seraphim Rose, and she read that, and she converted to Orthodoxy. And
Glory to
so
God.
people, all over the world, not just in America, because I'd say number one, America, because he's one of the first people here who actually start translating things from the Russian language
Right.
to English. Because so much, and the Saint John of San Francisco, who we do recognize universally as a saint, that was his mentor.
Right.
And so he took a lot of that grace from uh, Father Saint John, Archbishop John at the time, and was able to not only earlier as he learned, to study Zen and Taoism, in China. He actually learned Chinese so he could study it with people who were from there. And so when he first visited the Orthodox Church, he went to Russian Orthodox Church, and so he learned Russian. He learned Russian, learned Slavonic. Those are not easy languages.
No, they're not.
I
No,
can
they're not.
speak a few words here and there, but it took me literally a year just to say hello in Russian. Здравствуйте. It's like your mouth has to
Yeah.
exercise to say it. So anyway, I'm saying that to say that because he's so brilliant mentally ability and so zealous, I think that combination, and I think because he was so in despair, that he not only did he have a wonderful background with a lot of knowledge and interests in different religions. So he had raised as a Christian. I think he was in the Methodist or something,
Right.
not denomination. So he knew Christianity and the basic forms of it. But when he learned about Taoism and Zen Buddhism, and he studied with Alan Watts, who was a very, very popular person who I remember reading and seeing his films when I was young. Very influential, these new ideas. And so taking all those ideas and then realizing, kind of going out to the edge of them and realizing it's like you're on the edge of a precipice. It's like, okay, this road is leading to, a dead end. So you're going out these different roads. I'm going to go down this path. You go down this path, and then you realize at the end of the path, it just stops. You imagine like driving down a highway, and all of a sudden, they quit making the road. It's like
Right.
Some of these mass transportation high-speed rails or something. It's like they start it in one place. It's supposed to go from here to here, but it's like, oh, we didn't have enough money. We need more, so we just stopped. But you're on that road driving. Right. And it's like,
and
like
that's what kind of, and he is American. You mentioned, Saint John Maximovich, and so many of the other saints that you mentioned in California. But even though Father Seraphim Rose isn't canonized yet, at least for me, it was I latched onto him because he's also an American. I grew up Methodist, and I went in many, not the exact same trajectory as him, but similar paths. And to see then where he is, and then the whole worldview, the whole phronema that he paints through all the different works, that is what colors my perception and my engagement with the world today. And it's interesting how he's also kind of a polarizing figure.
Oh,
So everything that we just said, and something that maybe isn't specifically addressed in the book, is one of the things I realized, because he was, like you said, Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, on the soul after death, nihilism. These were 3 books that were really influential to me getting into the church.
right.
And then I was kind of stunned by it. There's a significant portion of I wouldn't say significant, but there are multiple clergy members that I've spoke to that maybe aren't the biggest fans of Father Seraphim. And some of it has to do with the toll houses, which is something that you actually address in the book. And that's a very controversial topic in online
It is.
Orthodoxy. It's one of the ones I try to avoid just because it sets people off on both sides.
Yeah, it does.
But could you speak to a little bit about why he's maybe even a little bit polarizing for some people in the Orthodox world?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I actually, when I was doing American Orthodox, the documentary as well as the book, that was one of the areas I kept thinking, oh, we should go up to Platina, and people kept, are you going to go to Platina? And I really wanted to do that, but then I realized that's a whole story by itself. It's
Yeah.
just too much to do everything with Port Ross and San Francisco, about
Yeah.
all these other saints, and then do Seraphim Rose too, because his story, as you said, is very controversial. There's a lot to it, and I had been I've been reading his book since the beginning. I have a friend, Timothy Honeycutt. So anybody knows Orthodox Wisdom channel, highly recommend. He was one of the first people I met when I came to Sacramento, and he's here in Sacramento. He goes to church with me and his family, and really wonderful people, really wonderful man. And he has done probably more work than most people I know about Father Seraphim Rose, as far as actually interviewing Father Paul Baba and doing a lot of these talks. He's taken them and translated them, onto his channel, Orthodox Wisdom. And so back to the question of the controversy, is because even though I was like, oh, that'll be the next great movie to do, and hopefully somebody else can help maybe do that. But then partially as I started to finish American Orthodox, and I started thinking, okay, my next one we're going to do Seraphim Rose, go to Platina, and I talked to Abba Damascene about it and say, would you mind being interviewed? And he was like, oh yeah, as long as you give me the questions ahead of time so I know what you're going to ask, he'll do it. And I'm like, yeah, well, of course, that's helpful too, just so you'll know. And I've known him for years, and I've been there many times. And other people, Father Paul Bob, I know personally, and Father Peter Harris, I've met. He's been in my house, and so a lot of these people I know them, and I could do interviews and been to Platina, but because there was so much controversy, and I was kind of like halfway through the idea of doing it. I had compiled a lot of information, so I already, like I said, these books I don't just like write them like all in like a few weeks or anything. I mean, I've been working on his story from the beginning for years, actually, just kind of taking it in. And then there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, so I would take a lot of those stories that I'd hear, and I'd like take notes, and I'd put those together and say, oh yeah, that's a good interview, I hadn't heard that story. And so that's part of what's in the book too, so the stories I've heard, as well as people who I know personally, and the experience of me reading all those books myself. But back to the controversy, there was really, I kind of actually put the whole thing on the shelf, because I was like, you know what, I mean, I'm hearing too many negative stories. There's a lot of areas that it's like, oh, I don't even know if I want to be the person who's in the middle of any of the storm of controversy on either side. So I'll just enumerate the main controversies. There's several. I literally had put the whole thing on the shelf. I was like, I'm not going to even do this book. I'm going to just focus on, I did Light Journey. This was actually going to be my second book after American Orthodox, but I did that one. I took this off the shelf, off of my table basically, and I did Light Journey, which is more about Brother Jose and a lot of the other pilgrimage and business and places. Because I don't know if I want to do it. So back to the controversies, the toll houses is one, And that's basically, and I talk about it in the book from
Right.
just reading the book, and then also reading several other books on life after death, and one including The Departure of the Soul.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
his
have
book is
that one.
called The Soul After Death, which is
Right.
is very intense, read. And a lot of people read it, and many people became Orthodox because of reading it, because it's a
Right.
I gotta get my soul right. That's
Right.
really what it's about. It like lets you know it's not just everybody doesn't just die and just instantly go to heaven and just see the light and all of that. Everything's perfect. There's more to it. And we know, just as Orthodox Christians, regardless of how we believe, I mean, we have certain prayers we do for the departed. And there's a
Right.
reason why we do that. Because it's not like, oh, well, if you were saved, you're going to just go to heaven. If you didn't accept Jesus, you're going to go to hell. No, it's a lot more to life than just a simple, quick decision. You're not just either good or bad. It's like
Right.
we have a whole process that we go through on a daily basis. And it's not just at the end of life or after life, but it's, it starts really today. Every day
Right.
you get a chance to start over. So a lot of people say, well, I believe in reincarnation because I think we have second chances. I go, well, that's what's called each day is a second chance.
Yeah.
Every moment you get to start a new life. You can decide today, okay, I want to follow God. I want to at least seek the truth, whatever it is. I don't know the answers. And so we humble ourselves. We try to do good. Okay, I can help this person. Let me give this money to this poor person over here, or let me talk to my ailing neighbor, or whatever it is, little things that you can do. And so that's the Toll House idea, is basically that it continues on a different plane, because as most people might realize, that what we see materially is a small percentage of the fullness of the universe.
Right.
I mean, not just even if you were only a materialist, the materialists even say, well, we're only this small little tiny blue speck, and there's all these
Right. Exactly. I think it's
I
in the
was like,
light
okay,
spectrum and
right, exactly. And so you even if that's all you think, then you realize, okay, well, it's definitely a lot more than stuff you don't know about, right?
right.
But we could say that, and say that, well, what if there are different dimensions or different planes, spiritual realms, and there's angelic beings and different demonic realms, etc.
Right.
Just like there are on Earth. There's
Right.
definitely good places and bad places, quote vibes, of energy, etc., and different kinds of people doing different things. And so that's really what the Toll House is about. So that's one
Right.
of the biggest controversies, because some
Yeah.
people just
I didn't
like,
want you to feel like you got to do the defense for the toll houses or anything.
no,
like
no,
that.
no, no.
Yeah.
No, that's just probably one of his biggest controversies.
Yeah,
Is people
that was
take
the one
it,
I ran into in parishes here in Indiana, is that
they don't want to talk about
they
it.
don't. Yeah, the toll houses it's a difficult topic to talk with most clergy about, because
Yeah, it's best
the
not to
spectrum.
sometimes.
That's why I appreciated the way you framed. There was one paragraph where you kind of reframed your understanding after reading the book from St. Anthony's Monastery,
Yeah,
Life
that was
After
very
Death.
helpful.
And that was what I had kind of struggled with, because at first it kind of sounds like a purgatory or some type
Right.
of tempting by the demons.
Right.
For those listening that aren't familiar, toll houses are, I guess, places in which the soul is confronted with their sins on their way to the kingdom, on their way to judgment. And the way that you phrased it, because if you get too far to the left, one of the reasons why people feel uncomfortable with it is it calls into question God's grace, his mercy, and the victory that Christ had on the cross. And the idea that, again, their argument typically is the idea that a demon could drag you back down to hell or something, calls into question the validity and the power of Christ. And then on the other extreme, I think they give people anxiety by making them feel like if there's anything they haven't confessed or nothing that they've confronted, well, then the demon's going to know and you're going to be screwed. And the way that you kind of framed it, which I appreciated, is kind of the royal path, the middle path, is that it's not so much that anybody can call into question the victory of Christ. It's that maybe there are things that you had not yet repented from or recognized in yourself, and that these confrontations of the soul during their moment and their movement back to God, this is an opportunity. It's actually something grace-filled. It's actually something that isn't so much to be worried about, but if you have a repentant heart, you're going to be able to pass through that pretty well.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of that's the takeaway from that from me, is you don't have to go to one extreme to the other, or believe it or not believe it. Because again, it's not a dogma of the church. If you read the,
Right.
the
And that's
creed, it's
why
not like in there, but it's there's a lot of history about it. So there's iconography, there's church fathers, saints who talk about it. So, and hymnography even. So it's not like it's just, oh, we just made this up either. But on the other hand, do the best you can here on earth, live the best life. You do want to be repentant, humble, and seek God. And that's also why it's important to get people, your spiritual father, your priest, and your family and others to pray for each other. Because that's part of just getting through life. So that's probably one of his biggest controversies, is that another one is the whole thing about Genesis, creation, early man. Because that whole thing, people again frame it with these false dichotomies. It's like, it's either you believe the Bible literally, or you believe science. And it's
right.
like, no, that's not,
Right.
those are, that's a false dichotomy. It's like, science is a method, scientific method of looking at different things and measure certain things. So it's, it's not like you don't, quote, believe. Science is not a God that you put all your trust in, quote, the science. But
Right.
you can experiment and you can examine things. And it's basically, it's a tool like that. But it doesn't give you all the answers to life either.
Right.
And so the same thing with the Bible is the stories of Genesis are not science textbooks or history books either. So it's not written in a sense and saying, okay, well, these are the exact number of hours in these days when God says, on this day this happened. They're not measuring these things. He's giving a story, and he's giving, the biggest takeaway is that God created the heavens and the earth.
Right.
That's the biggest takeaway. And that God has given us life. He's given us the garden, basically paradise, and he's given us some instructions. And they start out very simple, like, just, you can have everything you want, just don't have this one little thing right now yet. Maybe later you might, but don't get too, above your pay grade.
Right. Exactly.
Stay in your lane, as they said. As they get back to the obedience and humility.
Right. The topic of evolution or modern cosmology and Christianity, that I feel like that conversation comes up quite a bit whenever I engage with somebody who's already not religious, or maybe they're agnostic or atheist, or just a little bit confused on why you would need a creator God or anything like this. And the way that I always break it down to them, and from my understanding, this is totally consistent with Orthodoxy, is, you get the evangelicals that have a incredibly literal interpretation of the Genesis narrative. And I'm not even dismissing that is false.
Right.
And then you have the atheists that believe in the Big Bang and material macroevolution. And my sentiment is, if God is a creator, which obviously I believe he is, well, God could create creation in already a sort of adult stage. It's already aged. And so, and I do believe that sin didn't enter the world until Adam fell. And so if that's the case, I believe in then speciation. So microevolution. And I don't think this disproves God in any way. I think that essentially there are a male and a female of every species. And then through microevolution, speciation, you have the various species of sharks that inhabit different niches. But everything originates from a singular source, a singular genesis of a male and a female. And to me, if God is a creator, and I'm going to continue in that category of omniscience and omnipotence, well, then it makes total sense that could be the case. And then any logical conundrums on, oh, well, we did carbon dating on Göbekli Tepe and it's 12,000, okay, well, if and again, I don't make a claim on, oh, it's 7,000 years old or 12,000 or whatever.
Right.
But my point is, I think as an Orthodox Christian, there's a very easy way to reconcile this innate tension between modern evolution theory, anthropology, and then our Orthodox faith, is that if God is a creator, everything has a created beginning. And from that point, you don't have to dismiss the fact that there's phenotypes and there's physiological differences between species and different niches. That's also a grace-filled creation by God that, you know, when you take Bio 101, they always talk about the squirrels on the different sides of the Grand Canyon, that at one time they were the same squirrel, but now because the Grand Canyon, they're two different species with two different phenotypes. It's like, okay, well, don't you see how that's a beautiful creation of God?
Right. They're still squirrels.
Yeah, they're still squirrels though, and they've never been able to prove the leap between species.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. A dog and a wolf are still canine types, but they're not cats.
Right.
And so that's, yeah, no, I get it. So that's what you're saying. I think it is a good way of looking at it. But that's again, that's one of the controversies, because people will kind of jump on these different rabbit holes of either or, and you can go to the certain other extremes and say, well, if you're really a Christian, you'll believe it happened exactly this way on this day and this day and this day and this day. And then there's, you know, the other side of science. Well, how could there be, you know, planets before the sun? And it's like, okay, you know what? Is that really what we need to spend our energy fighting over those things? I mean, maybe that's your profession as a biologist or a geologist, and you want to, you know, show these things or experiment or whatever. But, you know, his mission, I think, in the whole book of creation, Genesis, creation, early man, is not, you know, to prove or disprove, you know, the exact age of the earth, or whether it's a flat earth, or whether there's the moon landing. And a lot of these things, you can go into these different topics, and they're, you know, interesting arguments on different sides of them, and I don't want to get into that. But he says that you can get pulled into these, you know, debates and arguments over things. In the meanwhile, you're just like enraging your pride and judgment, and you're just getting off track of, okay, are you becoming a better person? Are you, you know, speaking, you know, and living a life of truth?
Right.
You know, those are the things that are more important. And so I think the book is important, and I think the topic is important. But again, that's another one of his biggest controversies. So those are, like, say, two of them. And then the other, I say there's two more big controversies, and I'll say this one quickly, is the Orthodoxy religion, the future, and nihilism, and the whole thing about the Orthodox survival course, you know, which I would like to see that as a fully, you know, developed book by the monastery. But, you know, there's different versions of it, and people have talked about it, so we were aware of it. But because he does make a really strong case about the history of the world, and the whole nihilism and the modernism, and the whole different revolutionary tactics, you know, different groups, etc., that people get kind of uncomfortable with that, you know, because it's like, well, you know, he's too strict, or he's too, you know, whatever, you know, too rigorous, etc. And I don't see that being the case, you know, because this whole thing is really about the royal path.
Right.
You know, it's like you look at life, and there is a reality to different historical movements, and there's a lot of history, as we probably all know, that's not told to us truthfully. Just like I mentioned, you know, I never grew up in California, and I never heard about Fort Ross or the Russian presence, you know, or that they were like Russian ships on both coasts of North of America during the Civil War.
Right.
You know, as well as in 1812 that they were here. So I mean, those are the things. Why isn't that part of our history class? I don't know.
Right.
You know, I mean, I have my reasons to think why it might not be. So anyway, those are three things. The whole modernism thing, because people are into like, oh, we got to think modern's better of the future. We got to be futuristic and, you know, sophisticated, etc. Where his is all about, you know, don't just go too far with, you know, whether it's technology or ideology or materialism, etc. You know, there's a place for those things. I mean, he had a typewriter, you know, so in the old printing press, I'm sure he would have used a computer if he could have gotten one to do this, which is what I do now. But so that's three. But I'd say the biggest, last but not least controversy is his lifestyle. And there are those, in particular, his niece did a book, Kathy Scott, that talked a lot about his personal life, you know, before he became Orthodox. And so because of his you know, lifestyle, and I won't go into all the details of it, but just the idea that, you know, let's just say same-sex preference or whatever, you know, attractions, etc., things like that, and, you know, relationships, or at least one relationship that would not necessarily be on the high level plane of what we would consider Orthodox anthropologies, etc.
Right.
That people will take that and say, oh, well, he's this, therefore I'm not going to listen to anything he says because he's a corrupt, terrible person.
Right.
There are people like that.
Yeah.
And then add that into the idea and the reality that there were some definite controversies that occurred after his repose in 1982 with the monastery that he helped found and the person who he had founded it with. That there are a lot of questions about that other person became deposed from ministry for allegations, let's just say, of improprieties, etc. And so that, you kind of get the broad brush between those two factors. Oh, he was like this before he went, and then the person he was there with all this time became, went down the road of, immorality after he died. So therefore, he must have known, or maybe he never changed. So that's a controversy. And, I don't have all the answers to it because obviously I'm not there, I wasn't there. Timothy Honeycutt did a really good article, and I kind of summarized it in the book, because he does a kind of an answer to Kathy Scott's book, about his life. And my basic take is that there's probably strong evidence that he did have some of those issues, before he became Orthodox. But most of the evidence that I've seen, and I don't have all the, I've heard anecdotal stories. I have friends who've said, well, I know somebody who said this happened when he was there. I don't know those, for as quote evidence that's that strong, but I know the evidence that points to his very ascetic life.
Right.
And that he worked directly with St. John, who was a clairvoyant elder for many years. And the church, the Russian Orthodox Church, is like the most strict of all the churches. And it's not to say that there are, some people who fall away, especially sometimes that can make you more falling away, because those things can be so strict that people will just can't tell people what I'm thinking because, I'll get kicked out. And so they may, in many cases, either go to the other extreme and just either hide things, or they could just rebel and say, oh, well, I can't be perfect, so I'm just going to go to hell anyway. I may as well just live my life. So anyway, that's a controversy, is what his previous life was and what did he know, when did he know it, regarding the monastery, of things that happened that we know of after his repose. So, based on all those, I was like, oh,
yeah,
I don't really want to get into all this. I don't really know enough about it.
Yeah,
I don't really want to take a side about it, because I don't know.
Right. No, I would be the same way. But again, I'm a big fan of Father Seraphim Rose, and I'm aware of some of his earlier life and like you said, his lifestyle. But I've never heard anything derogatory after he took his vow or once he became Orthodox. So yeah, that has never been something that bothered me. And at the same time, even though some Orthodox kind of stay away from him for those reasons, I think it's appealing also, given the culture we live in, for other people who are trying to find a way into the church and turn away from that type of behavior or lifestyle and whatnot.
Yeah, in fact, there's a guy, Joseph Siambra, I believe is how he pronounced it. I've met him, and he has a Brotherhood of Saint Joseph, I think it's called, and he has a YouTube channel. He was in that lifestyle, extremely into it, and he said that Father Seraphim Rose basically saved him, by him hearing about his life and the fact that he was in San Francisco, because this person was in San Francisco in the whole whole area. Yeah, he's a good guy, and he does his best to try to bring the truth out. And so I'm saying all that to say that there's definitely controversy about that part of the life, but most of the evidence that I've seen that's more that I can basically verify or has the strongest side of it. No, and the last thing is basically saying just what you just said, that he was a sinner, and then now he may become a saint.
Exactly.
And I compare him, not saying he's on the same level as, but like Saint Mary of Egypt,
exactly,
and Saint Moses the Black, and even Saint Paul, formerly Saul, who was like a murderer of Christians.
Right.
Saint Mary Vija, for those who don't know, she was a total, not even a prostitute, because she didn't take money for it. She was just a very promiscuous, super promiscuous, from what I understand of her.
Yep.
I'm actually working on a project about her too.
Oh, good.
But she became,
that's my
and also Moses the Black.
Yeah.
Moses the Black. He was like a total gang banger, murderer, killer in the desert, total brigand, as they say.
Yeah.
And
back before when Kanye went through his Christian phase, which it seemed very brief, he made a comment about how he wished African-American men knew about Moses the Black, because that's who they should look up to.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure his sentiments are different now, but back that was like early 2000s. I thought, oh, that'd be fantastic. Nobody knows about him.
So that's one of my next projects. I want to write, or I am writing about St. Moses the Black and Mary Vija. And there's another saint a lot of people don't know about called St. Maurice and the Theban Legion. Have you ever heard of him?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, Theban Legion. I won't give it away too much, but he's was in the Roman Legion, during those first centuries, persecution of the Christians. I believe it was under Diocletian, and Thebes is part of Africa. So these were Africans, by heritage, Egyptian, who became part of the Legion, because the Roman Empire basically is all over. So they had all kinds of ethnicities. They're not all just Italians, etc. So bottom line is he was like a captain of that legion, or head of the legion, and he became part of where we now are going to go up here. We got to kill these Christians and sacrifice them. And he was like, no, we're not going to do that. And so you can imagine, if you're a soldier for the Roman Legion and you disobey orders, so you're either going to kill them or we're going to kill you.
Exactly.
And all your men. So anyway, that's
That'd
St.
be
Maurice.
great. I've not heard of that saint.
Yeah. So those are 3 stories. I'm working on. They're all, kind of in that same realm.
Right.
Moses the Black, Mary Vija, and Maurice.
Yeah, I love
that. The Theban Legion.
One of the questions, I apologize, we're already over 2 hours, so I told you I was going to keep you just for 2 hours, but I got at least one more, if not 2 more questions, if you allow me. Okay.
I'm good. I'm good.
So the next thing that I wanted to get into, and this is kind of the theme, when you go through the works of Father Seraphim Rose, I take, at least my interpretation, the underlying theme is really a reinforcement of the first thing you mentioned in regards to what was it? Revelation to the human heart. Reflections on God's revelation to the human heart. Is Orthodoxy is about the heart and not the mind. And so to me, this relates again with your later chapters talking about internet orthodoxy, and the way that you frame it and Father Seraphim Rose is the horizontal versus the vertical. The vertical being the spiritual depth, which is the point of the Orthodox Christian and the Orthodox life. Horizontal being, once they get into orthodoxy or any topic, is they become enamored by the horizontal growth of knowledge on a singular plane. And I think that what is occurring right now, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, is for me, where I came from, in academia, psychedelics, New Age, is I needed a rational bridge for why I could dive into it. Like you said, a man-made religion, right? These are the religions of men, right? I'm interested in experiences. And in that pursuit, like so many of the younger men that are converting to the Orthodox faith right now, it's diving into church history. It's diving into different dogmas, the schism, the intricacies of theology. And in that pursuit, one of the things that can be missed, and I've done one-on-ones with young men that actually, I talked with one guy, he was like 20 years old, incredibly sharp on Orthodox. Then I asked him, what parish you go to? Oh, no, I haven't even gone to a church yet. And I thought, dang, dude, you've read all these books. Like, I was impressed by how much he knew for his age. And it's like, you've never gone to a church. He's like, no, I don't know. I don't know if I feel comfortable. And I was trying to explain to him, look, you have a great foundation of knowledge, but you have to be in the parish, because that's when your spiritual relationship with other people in Christ really begins. and having to deal with the shortcomings of your other parishioners and the personalities, and being in a group of people that you don't choose. You're there because you love Christ, and then being able to work that out with each other and form deep bonds and relationships. Like, this is the part of the life. So it's great that you want to do debates and apologetics, but you can't call yourself Orthodox. And then when I ask you what parish you've gone to, you say, actually, I've never gone to one. It's like, dude, that misses the entire point of what we're doing here. And so could you speak a little bit about the way you view the relationship between the mind and the heart? Because when you talk about the Orthodox survival course, I mean, that is about the mind in a sense of how the West, through intellectual trajectory from the Renaissance forward, has gone on this journey that has brought us to the nihilistic, relativistic, postmodern phase that we live in. And the West really has been doing this through a journey of the mind. And Orthodoxy doesn't nullify the journey of the mind, but the journey of the mind doesn't make sense without the purity of the heart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And believe me, I'm definitely not the expert on the dichotomy of mind, heart, and what we call the nous and the spirit and the soul.
Right.
There's a lot of very subtle ways of describing some of these things. It can be kind of depends on who's saying it. They'll sometimes use the same. I've even heard like the word intellect used for the word nous, which is, in our mind, that's totally not the same thing.
Right.
Nous being the noetic, or so they may say the eye of the soul, or the heart. And so what I understand about it, which is again very limited, so I don't want to speak too much on this is what it all is about, because I don't know enough to say that. But back to like the person you were just saying, it's not enough to just have all this intellectual knowledge. I mean, obviously God has given us the reasoning mind, an ability for a reason, just as he's given us a physical body for a reason. So both of these are good things. God created us with, mind, body, different, senses, etc., abilities. And the heart, as far as I understand, is, not just the physical center, here, which it is in that sense, but it's where you feel something. We always, use kind of like the Valentine to represent love, because that's really kind of an image of the heart. Or, if you hear a tragedy, sometimes you will feel something. I mean, most humans have a sense of, aching heart. I mean, and probably the most common one that most of us probably know is, you have your heart broken.
Yeah.
If you've ever been in a relationship and disappointed, whether it's in a love relationship or even losing a job or something, you have something that you want, or somebody that you have these dreams about or whatever, and it just like suddenly you feel like either betrayed or lost or grief. And even when you're like a death in the family or something, there's a grief, and you feel these things in your heart. And so that's back to what the difference is, because those are not like intellectual, just thought patterns. These are, Father Seraphim talks a lot about pain of heart, or when the disciples were walking along after the resurrection, they didn't realize what happened to Jesus, and he comes up walking alongside them and they don't recognize him. And he starts, he's like, why are you guys all, upset? He didn't say it like that, but
in 2025, you would.
I know. They're like, hey, what's up with you, man? I was like, don't you know that the world is coming to an end? Like we would say today, probably. Don't you know it's all, all seems lost. That's like the end of a screenplay. You got to get that all seems lost moment, page 90 on that 120. Anyway, and so he then starts telling them, well, don't you know that this happened and this happened, these things are all part of the same story? And he continues, and they're like, okay, whatever. And then they get to where they're going, oh, why don't you come with us? He's like, no, I'm going that way. No, come on over. And you go, okay. And then he breaks bread and he hands it to them, and then it's like, boom, their eyes are open. And he says they burned in their hearts. Their hearts burned, when he was enlightening them. And so there's like that burning in the heart that is like this aching longing, like if you've ever longed, whether it's for like a person, love interest, or some dream that you have, I really want to make this movie, or, I want to do this thing or whatever. There's a heartness to that. And I think that's the issue with our relationship with God. It's not just like, well, I believe God is three persons and, you know, one unity and Trinity. And it's like you can say all these words.
Right.
I mean, you can even say the whole creed and believe those intellectually, but is there, you know, like I said, Christ is not like an idea, you know, or a concept, it's a person.
Right.
And so you have that aching connection, that personal connection in your heart.
Right.
And we come to that place where it's only done. And it's oftentimes, you know, beauty, as they say, will save the world. That's Dostoevsky quote that
Right.
he uses, I think, in The Idiot, I believe it is. And sometimes it's like you just see a sunset and you weep.
Right.
You know, have you ever seen like the Grand Canyon?
Right.
And you just like, oh God. And you just see this beauty. You know, we were up in Alaska. I mean, it's like they had midnight sun. I mean, literally, and all these beautiful places. And it's like, I remember one first time I walked into an Orthodox church where they had the whole, you know, walls covered, you know, in the dome and everything. And I literally wept just because I was so touched, you know, by not just the physical beauty, but just the experience, the humility of it. And
The
that's
sacred
why,
space.
yeah, and you have to go to church. You have to be in the presence, not just, oh, I'm going to read all these books and I'm going to believe these things and I'm going to go out and argue and I'm going to go and convince everybody, you know, that I'm right and everybody's wrong. Because again, are you coming out of just your own pride?
Right.
Are you coming out of anger? Are you coming out of vanity? Oh, you think you're so smart?
Right.
That's why, you know, I know I've said this a few times, but it's like I have to remind myself I'm not young enough to know everything. Because I know when I was so much younger, I thought, oh, well, I know, you know, have you read the Bible? Oh yeah, I know all about that. And it's like, do you really? I mean, I've read a dozen, more than, I would say at least 7 or 8 times cover to cover. I have a very small clue of really what it's about.
Right.
You know, I'm very, very, and coming to the church where you're actually hearing these stories over and over, you know, being part of the services, then you actually see them all connected together. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize. Yeah, I'd seen that so many times and I didn't realize, oh, you know, there's the crucifixion and then the resurrection and then the ascension and then the day of Pentecost. I mean, because these are actual festivals.
Feast. Yeah, these are feast days.
So it's like those are day, you know, I didn't even know what any of that, you know, what's the transfiguration, you know, and it's like we have all these different churches with all these different names, the Annunciation of this or the Assumption, you know, the Dormition. And it's like I didn't know what any of those words meant, you know,
Right.
transfiguration. But now, you know, the ascension. You
Right.
know, you see those stories, and my saint is Saint John the Theologian, you know, so he was there, you know, at the ascension and at the transfiguration.
Right.
Yeah, and he was the only of the saints, of the apostles, who was there at the crucifixion.
Right.
With his Saint Mary, you know,
Yeah.
the Virgin Mary.
Right.
Actually, that's my book that you mentioned earlier about Beloved Disciple that I just finished.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about his life, you know, because a lot of those stories, you don't even when you read the Bible, it doesn't really tell you what happened after that.
Right. You don't
you know,
get
other than just
the
a
traditional
little bit
story.
in
Yeah.
Acts,
Around it.
yeah. And you don't know anything about where did Mary, you know, what was her life like before that?
Right.
You know, and so there's what they call proto-evangelium of James, and there's the lives of the saints.
Right.
And there's a lot of writings that are more part of the tradition. And we use the scripture, obviously, you know, as the most important of all the traditions in the writings, you know, the gospel, you know, writings, you know, the saints,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're not going to say anything's more important as far as the actual writings of them. But you can also say that, you know, just like in the end of St. John, he says, there's so many more things that happen, you know, that there's not enough books. I couldn't write them all. You know, he could
Right.
not write everything that Jesus said and did.
Right.
In all the books in the world.
Right. And to the point you were making about, you know, you didn't know some of the details or the intricacies of the theology or the church. And let's say the young man who actually does know the definition and the explication of everything that is mentioned, the point about what you're discussing with Christ is met in the heart. Like, you know, Christ can build a bridge for you through the mind, but the relationship begins through your heart. And going to a parish, and I always bring this up about when I first went to the parish that I belong to, love my parish, that I was somebody who, one of these young guys, very zealous, very about what Orthodoxy teaches, making sure the tradition doesn't change. And there was a gentleman that was part of the church who I was aware of, like, some of his social media posts, and he had opinions and was posting things that definitely were not consistent with Orthodoxy. And he was a central figure of the parish. And at one point, and it took like a year and a half, 2 years, but just by being there, at one point, I realized that my condemnation of him, and maybe we even got into arguments and fellowship or minor debates, was incredibly futile, and that I was falling short in all these other aspects of my life. Yeah, maybe I knew I could explicate or describe something and say, this, you can't be Orthodox and think this. But it wasn't until the day that I was able to say I love him and gave him a hug in fellowship that I felt the transformation in myself about, like, what the point of the parish is, right? The point of the parish, and not that you don't correct your brother. I mean, I could have went about it much better.
There's a place for it.
But it's building those relationships and having strong, healthy relationships with people in the parish. Then when you look at the Dormition, or you look at the gospel and the feast days that we celebrate, the knowledge of it moves from the head, and there's another layer of meaning that I think people then can discover there. And that's where the people who don't know all the explications and the philosophy and the theology, that's the level, that's where sanctification happens. And that is not, there's no prerequisite for knowledge for that practice.
Right.
And that's where the mystery is. And so I think that's really important for young people to not just believe that miracles can happen and believe in mysticism and the mystical theology of the church. You got to go be in the church and deal with people maybe you feel a little frustrated with. Maybe they irk you in certain ways. Now you're actually doing the thing, the interior work, the vertical.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Yeah, learning a lot of these things. I mean, for some people, it's difficult just to try to understand, how do you explain the Trinity, or, energy, essence, distinction, all those kind of things. Okay, most people don't really know enough about it. I mean, yes, some of these, older women who've been in church, but they're so much full of love, and they'll take you in, they'll feed you, and they'll do all these things. They don't know everything. I mean, they know how to say the creed, and they know how to pray, and they know how to make sign of cross, and they come and do the confession and communion and fast, etc. But that's really the last things that St. John, again, my theologian, patron saint, he talked about, when people would talk to him towards the end of his life, and he lived like 100 years old after all the other disciples had died. But he would just say, love one another. Love one another. Love one another. That would be his whole thing. And you look at, like St. Seraphim was Seraph, he talks about, acquire the spirit of peace, 1,000 around you be saved.
Right.
And that happens, acquiring the spirit of peace or loving one another happens in interaction, and in humility, and in, actions, not just in intellectual assent, ideologies or belief systems, or just agreeing, that, yes, I think these things are true and I can really argue about them. Because again, is that your pride talking now? Are you just trying to show off that how smart you are and how everybody's so wrong, and you figured it all out? Because I've been like that, and I'm still probably that way a lot of times. It's like I like to think I'm right, and they don't get it. Don't you see?
Right.
But
and I
be
think
humble
with our online culture too, and how we do have great Orthodox apologists in our community, and you may root for them and you love their content, that doesn't mean everybody has to be an online Orthodox apologist debating constantly and defending the faith. That takes a lot of time. That takes years of work, and the spiritual formation aligns with the educational formation, and to utilize that stuff. So I think that for some people coming in the church, they're just kind of over their skis, in the sense that they see how forceful maybe some of our arguments are, or they're really convinced about the validity of the church. But just settle in, it's
all about rooting too.
Yeah.
Being rooted, because it's like a plant, you can have this really beautiful plant, but you just put it in, if you just set it on top of the ground and think, oh yes, it's a beautiful rose or whatever, and it'll just fall over, the wind comes, it's like, say, building your house on the rock. If you don't have that foundation, and that foundation is in the holy mysteries of the church. It's not just the beliefs of it. It's you're actually personally connected. And it's you go through those humiliating and humbling experiences of people telling you what to do sometimes, or where you do stuff you don't really want to do.
Right.
And or you help people who can't help you back, or they're not going to be impressed by you. Little things like that. That's part of that vertical. As you root yourself down into the ground, with being planted in a place, and you say, well, do you not believe in God? In other words, if you actually believe in God, then you believe that God is able to work through these people around you, and in through a priest, the bishop, and the people, and that you're actually in the place that you need to be for now.
Right.
It doesn't mean, oh, here, well, now if you walked in one church, you can never go to another one, because we go to a lot of different ones here. But a lot of times, you don't have those choices. It's like the only one is like there's one church, it's like 30 miles away, it's a Serbian or it's Greek or it's something, and maybe you don't really feel comfortable. But just do what you can just to come and see, as we say.
Yeah.
And do
stay at
best you
fellowship.
can.
Stay at fellowship. I talked with some people and they liked going to liturgy, but they never stayed for fellowship.
Yeah,
And
meet
I was like,
people.
man, stay for fellowship. Talk with them. Like you might meet a friend. And I actually spoke with this person months and months later, and like, hey, that was actually a good idea. There's another guy who's around my same age. Turned out we had a bunch of the same interests. I'm like, there you go. That's the point. Like you got to form relationships with people. And that's the, like you said, part of the mystery, how God works through the church. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that you can't have friends outside the church. It's that the church life is a life, and you have to participate in that to get the full fruits of what Orthodoxy is trying to offer and the intention of your life.
It is about bearing fruit too, as you say, you'll know them by their fruits. And how does he say, you'll know them by their love? And so if people are not loving one another, and they're not, and by that, it's not just, oh, everything's all lovey-dovey, just be all emotional about it either. This is, the truth in love. You speak the truth, you live a truthful life. But, it's like, are you putting yourself like in Christ, following him, basically picking up your cross, following him.
And that's the providence of the parish, is your friends, like my friends that aren't Orthodox, I chose them to be my friend. Right. And then we formed relationships, years and years, have memories. You don't choose the people that inhabit your parish. You see, it's like God's providence, again, wherever your parish is. And like you said, maybe wherever you find your home parish to be, at any rate, you didn't choose all the people that inhabit that parish. And so for to be loving, you need to learn how to love people. One, you meet people for the first time. Maybe you're there then for years. You form deep relationships. Maybe there's one guy that just totally irks you all the time. And then figuring out how to love them. That's exactly what you're talking about. That's why that mystery happens in the parish.
Yeah, humility is one of the total opposite of what we're taught as far as society. As far as virtues, we're pretty much taught the opposite. As like, exalt yourself. You're the number one. And yeah, that's how, they say, he who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So, we have to follow the example of Christ as much as we can.
Right. John, I've already kept you over the time that I told you I would, so I don't want to hold you. We have a couple questions. The one that everybody's asking right now is, do you have any social media? People want to follow you. Some in the chat, we're trying to find you on X or different. I know you have a YouTube channel that promotes your film work and stuff, but is there any way that people can follow you or engage with you?
They can reach me through the website. There's a contact us as a web, my email, AmericanOrthodoxFilm@gmail.com. That's right there. Yeah. That's the thing. I don't, I used to be like super heavy. I mean, I used to have thousands and thousands of Facebook quote friends and Twitter followers, and all that. I was very active in that for many, many years. And I know there's a place for it, especially trying to promote films and books, etc. But I found for myself personally, I had to disengage just because I found myself getting too pulled into, speaking of controversies, it's just like reacting to people saying things, or like you like something and then someone tells you, oh, you like so and so. I'm like, okay, that's none of your business. You know what I mean? So I just got tired of dealing with it. And I appreciate people who do it, because I know that it's a place, where you can connect with people and you can share ideas. But no, you can contact me directly, and especially anyone who wants to have the film screen at their parishes. Yeah, just send a request. What you need to do ultimately is have the church, your parish, whether it's a priest or someone official, request it. Tell us the name of the parish who's asking, and we will send it to you for. I'm not charging people to see the film, because that's really the biggest thing that I want people to do. I want this film to be seen by many people, and I want to encourage people to make their own movies. If you see that, like you talked about a friend earlier on, who's got a film background. There's some really beautiful people out there, like that Harmony channel, for example.
Yeah.
Everybody loves them. I wish I could do that, what they do, because that's another way. Back to, you're talking about monetizing, and if you have people who have those kind of like animation or graphic skills, you can make a movie where you don't even have to go out and do all those filming, which is what we did. Obviously, there's definitely a need for real people, real interviews, real locations, and so I'm not discouraging that. But there's another place for just like where you're narrating the story or whatever thing you want to share with people, but you have some really beautiful graphics. Again, Harmony is one of my favorite of those.
They have a
those kind of
great
channels.
channel. Yeah.
And there's other ones out there, they do a good job as well.
This is what I was going to ask you about real quickly. What's your thoughts on AI films? People using AI to create films and try to skirt around budget problems and the expense.
Yeah, I think, just to be honest, I think there's a place for AI. I think you don't want to like just totally ignore it. And it's like again, you don't want to create the false dichotomy. It's like saying, oh, well, I'm not going to use AI at all, period, because it's evil or whatever. Or that you just are going to totally rely on it. Because just like it's like if you use Grammarly or grammar check and spell check, that's part, quote, AI in a sense that you're using it to help you to edit something. So there's a place for that. But as far as, I haven't seen a lot. I've seen some things where you can create like some images that are really good, very short ones. And I'm sure it's going to get better and better. So I don't discourage the idea of using it. I just would say that you need to, maintain your own creative voice and don't just get so reliant on it. You just think, it's like with writing a book. I can't just say, oh, I want you to write a book on Seraphim Rose and just like pumps it out. No, you can use it to like, okay, can you give me a better sentence than this sentence? It can give you a little bit of a flavor. You have an editor, a physical person who does it, and they can use it, like in the editing of the film to, speed up the process.
Right.
So I put it that way. Yeah, I would say that there's a place for it, but don't be so reliant on it that you're not really maintaining, your own personal creativity. Just like with me, I write my books, a lot of them, I do a lot of handwriting of the story, and then I create my own, the outline and the main characters, and I basically develop everything. But if you want to use, like Google to search and find a lot of information or to help you review something, there's a place for using it for that.
Right. Rebel Umbrian throws in 5. I'm not sure exactly what's meant by this comment. So do you have
about Jurassic Park?
Yeah, plans to build a dinosaur park. Sorry, not sorry. I couldn't resist. Can't wait to see the movie. God bless. I maybe something we said was a reference. I'm not sure.
Maybe it's like a dinosaur. Jurassic Park is the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, me too.
Movie out about that.
Anyways, Rebel, thank you very much for the support. Do appreciate it. And then our brother Abject Fool throws in 5, says for the goal. Thank you very much. And over on Streamlabs, Gorilla Biscuits throws in 5, says thanks for the stream. God bless. And Connor throws in $10 on Dono Chat and said, I found your channel because of the work you did for Blessed Father Seraphim Rose's lectures. Well, glory to God, Connor. I'm glad that was useful. I just took, the audio quality was terrible on some of those So I just refurbished it where there was no static in them, and
I
then I added
appreciate that.
visuals. But I'm glad
One
that
thing people can do too, I'll just throw this out since you mentioned that. It was one thing I actually did do speaking of using AI or research, is you can listen to like a video just like this one, and there's the transcripts. You can get like the transcripts of a video in many cases, like a YouTube, and then you can like not cut, but you can copy and paste them into a document. So that way you can actually read through it, and you can clean that up and take it and say, oh, okay. Because, a lot of times you don't want to just like listen to the whole thing over and over again,
right,
or try to remember what did he say about this, or taking notes, which I like to take notes. Like I said, I use, pen and paper as my go-to note taking. But again, I'm just saying that you can use those tools basically to gather your information, and that way you have it. That's one thing I have done to research, is you can gather a lot of information really quickly. So that's one of the things that's been helpful for me as well.
Yeah. Rebel said, come on, John Hammond. You guys really don't get that? Oh, is John Hammond the name of the guy?
That's me.
Well, I know that's you. That must
maybe
be the
that's
guy
the guy.
in Jurassic
I know.
Park.
That's the character's name.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know. I remember. I haven't seen that movie for so long. I forgot.
Yeah, now that I read the comment, I told him, I said, Rebel, tell us. Laugh aloud. I wasn't sure what it meant. Now I get it. John Hammond's the guy. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I know. That was my secret. That's why I'm off social media, because people keep coming at me for those dinosaurs. It's like
yeah, you didn't know that Jurassic Park was actually biographical. It's about John.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's my life story. Yeah, I'm the dinosaur.
No, that's not what I meant. Anyway,
the raptor.
John, thank you so much for the support.
You're welcome. Thank you for
joining me today. Is there anything you'd like to say, or something that you feel like maybe we missed about whether it be your documentary or, again, the book Voice in the Wilderness? And again, here is over on Amazon. Just go to John's name. And again, I've already reviewed these 3 books here, and I just found out, John sent me an email, it was yesterday or the day before, that he just published another book, June 28th, Beloved Disciple, Guardian of the Holy Virgin, about his patron saint, St. John the Theologian, who was incredibly inspirational for me. That's why I have an icon of him right here, because the Gospel of John was that was the final bridge that I crossed into, like, again, Logos theology, like really accepting Christianity as true. And then read Maximus the Confessor, and then from there it's Orthodoxy. That's the only.
Yeah, St. John is incredible. His life and the life of the Virgin Mary, of course. That's both of them in that image. You see them both at the cross there, and he says, "Behold thy son, behold thy mother." And so he basically takes her into his house,
right? Which
is, again, one of the arguments against those people say, "Oh, well, she had all these other children. If that was true, why would John be the one to take her?" But they go on some pretty wild adventures, including Mount Athos.
Right. No, I look forward I look forward to checking that book out as well. So, guys, support our brother John, his books on Amazon, his documentary coming out, and if you want to get a special viewing for your parish, talk to your priest and give your priest his email right here that we just talked about. The bottom of, I'll share the link again, AmericanOrthodoxFilm.com here in the chat. And
just send people that link. That's the best thing, especially those, you talk about social media. Anyone who has social media, they share like this stream, for example, it would be really good, because I always share your streams, and I even put them on my page, on my YouTube. And also, if you share the link to people, that's a lot of people I don't reach out, because I said I've got so much that I need to keep myself focused a little bit. So I do these. I did interview with Kyle and with John Hears, and people who come to me and say, "Oh, can you come on our stream?" I'll do it, but I don't really want to do a lot of interactions on
the social media. It's mentally taxing.
I just don't have that bandwidth.
Yeah, you're talking about the information age, and that's why so many people feel like time speeding up, is because you get on your phone and then you scroll X or Instagram or whatever your social media du jour is, and you're taking in so much stuff, your brain cannot process all this information. And I know whenever I do writing and researching and reading, like I deliberately try to stay off all the social medias that morning so my brain can actually settle in and think for an extended period of time. If not, it's like ideas and thoughts are just constantly going in and out of my head.
Well, same thing with like physical books. I mean, I literally know that, before the age of the internet, I mean, people would sit and just read and read and read, all day, read books. I did, now you still do, and we still do.
Yeah.
But I really encourage, like, in fact, before the stream, I said, you know what, I need to just sit down, turn everything off. I just want to reread my own book, which obviously I can read it quickly because I wrote it, but I literally went from page to page through the whole book again without any, looking at my phone, with my computer closed. And if you people, and I try to read like the scriptures, like if you spend a little bit, just even reading like a chapter of the Bible, the scriptures every day, especially the Gospels and the New Testament, there's so much that you can get out of that. So I encourage people, to read books. And I actually did get it translated into like Audible too. So I know a lot of times people just want to hear it while they're driving or doing other things. So you can listen to these books, on Amazon, on Audible, or you can do the Kindle version as well. But I really do highly encourage people to actually read like physical books.
Yeah.
At least, have one book that you're in the middle of reading. And, I know I've got stacks of books that I haven't read yet. I've got stacks of books that I have read.
Same. I got a stack right here I got to get through.
Yeah. So it's you got to keep that brain, and especially, getting up there in age too. It's really a strong exercise. I mean, I go out and we walk a couple of miles a day. I go to the gym sometimes. I'm not as much into a lot of things as I used to do. I was in the Army, so I've been, through stuff. But reading books is actually one of the best things that I'd say you can do for yourself. But also, probably the best thing of all is just go to church.
Yeah, but I agree with you. Reading a book, because so many people can't do it. They can't. Yeah. They can't sit still that long.
The attention is gone.
And if you can get in the habit of reading a physical book, and more than just a page or two, like actually sit down for, let's say, at least a half an hour. I mean, when I'm doing, and you may be different, but when I'm doing a reading day where I got to get through stuff, like I do 2 hour, 3 hour chunks of reading, and then I'll take a break, then I'll go eat something, do something different, then come back, and then another chunk, 2 hours of reading. So,
it's really important, because I think we're losing the ability, like if anyone's like 1984, the book.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the book, actually.
Yeah, well, I read 1984 before 1984. I was in high school, and I was in the military. I was in 1984, so it's very stuck in my mind. But if you recall, the whole thing, Ministry of Truth, the biggest thing that they would do is they would delete, news. I mean, one day we're at war with Eurasia. We've always been at war with Eurasia, and East Asia is our ally. The next day, it's like it's totally the opposite. We're at war with East Asia, and we've always been at war with East Asia, and Eurasia is, is our ally.
Right.
And it's like they would just burn all that information from the past away. And because of everything is so digital now, that's what happens now is we don't really maintain, records and documentation. It's like, wait a minute, this, like a lot of books, they have several editions. And I'll probably do edition because I know I'll make mistakes. And I'll say, oh, you know what, you put down, he changed his name to Seraphim, before he became a monk. No, I know he did it when he became a monk, but I actually, I found like there is an error or two in the book, and you'll find probably more than that. But, you still want to be able to maintain, these. I mean, I have an early copy of Creation and Early Man, and I've got Father Seraphim Rose. I mean, these are books that are like collector's items, really, because sometimes it's like you won't be able to find them sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
I do out of print.
St. Herman's Press just did a reprint of Genesis Creation.
Yeah, thank God.
And I bought a copy because I was afraid it was going to go out again. So
no, it's good. Yeah, I encourage people to go, and also to visit. That's the other thing. I just encourage everyone to visit, the monasteries, in your area. Obviously, your church first, your parish, and visit different ones if there's other ones in your area. But then come out, if you get out this way, come to Fort Ross. Let me just give a shout out to FortRossPilgrimage.org. If you want to put that up really quick, that's a quick shout out, because that's going to be a big event. There's going to be a lot of people coming. Fort Ross Pilgrimage, I think it's .org. If you can find it, I think it's it. Yeah. And so that's Saturday, October 4th, 2025. And it's 100 years of the celebrations. They've been doing liturgies every year since 1925.
Wow.
And it was actually originally built. The original chapel there was built in 1825. So it's really like 200 years that it's been there. But the churches go there every year, and they do services, and we do, it's going to be a big meals. It's going to be a conference the day before. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out. I know Robin and Kente, she's a big part of that.
Yeah.
And all of my other friends, Christine and others, who are part of Silas, my producer, and everybody, we'll all try to be there too. So if anyone ever gets out there, we'll hopefully see you there. So
well, I'm
thank
going
you
to,
again.
if I'm able to be out on the West Coast around then, my wife and I would love to go. Because it's a lot of fun.
Worth it if you ever get a chance. And if not, there's plenty just even coming there, but on an off day. It's a state park, so it's open to the public.
Looks like Derek's going to be there.
Okay, good. Well, I hope to meet you there, Derek. I like your content too. I like Derek. A lot of people, they don't know that I know who they are. I saw Richard Rowland the other day. You know Richard Rowland?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him up in Anchorage when I was up there last couple weeks ago. I didn't talk to him, but I just saw him, and I was like, "Hey, I know that guy." So anyways, it's a small world. No, he was there for the service.
Oh, for the same thing you were. Oh, okay.
For the glorification of Saint Olga. Yeah, that was amazing. Service.
That sounds like it. Well, John, thank you so much. God bless you and your work and everything that you're making. And everybody watching, please support our brother. And thank you for joining today. Thank you for everything that you're doing to contribute to Orthodoxy in America.
All right. Well, thank you. And I hope to see you again soon. All right.
Absolutely. All right, guys. I will be back potentially Sunday or Tuesday. We have a stream on the history of Christian Zionism and maybe a little discussion on how that relates to the Epstein fallout of the Trump administration. So anyways, I will see you guys then as always. And thank you so much. Until then, God bless.